The cubicle represents a tyranny. It confines your imagination, your thoughts, into a small physical area. Imagine pretty much every software engineer or finance person being able to, disconnect from their desk and look at holographic monitors on a beach and doing their work from there. That's not going to be science fiction. It's the modern office place.
Silicon Valley is all about building the future. A startup called Meta thinks it's getting there first, thanks to a big bet that it's made on augmented reality.
How are you?
Good, thank you. Welcome to Meta.
Thank you.
Call it a 360-degree office where you can spatialize your thoughts as part of your workflow for education, architecture, design, engineering, etc.
People often mix up augmented reality with virtual reality. VR totally blocks your ability to see or hear the real world. AR overlays holograms onto what you already see. Meta has tried to make its version of the workspace feel familiar.
You grab the hologram instead of using a controller or a mouse, and your brain already knows how to do it. In other words, we've designed an operating system that humanity has always known how to use. So you can see this eyeball, which is, by the way, photorealistic. You can see my hand is occluding the eyeball, and now the eyeball is occluding my hand, right? You see those two circles? They get small, and then they turn into this glowing white ball, and then I can move my hand around supernaturally. I can do this with two hands and rotate the thing. I can stretch it. I can throw it back right into the shelving system, and that's all you have to learn to become a modern worker.
And to prove this, the employees at Meta have started to get rid of their computer monitors, trading them in for Meta's augmented reality headsets. Mayron thinks that in less than a decade, we'll all be just wearing strips of glass that can project holograms.
In the early 80s, everybody had computers on their desktop, but no one was using them because they had a lot of work to do. So they were still using typewriters. And at some point, the CEO took all the typewriters away and everybody was forced to use their computers. So it's very exciting to see a new generation of technology, a new paradigm.
I consider us like pioneers in the holographic wild. I'm pulling up my browser with my hands and sending out emails to colleagues and just kind of really acclimating to the new environment.
Now you're putting on my computer, essentially. Our digital lives live on our phones. We have all of our pictures and notes and all these kinds of things. So, and why don't you write yourself a little sticky note? I like it. And go ahead and just take your fist right over the top of the sticky note and close your fist. And now...
Oh, what? Meta's own transition to augmented reality has run into plenty of unexpected problems. And it's still going to be a while before you'll start to see these devices in your office. But I think it's a future worth waiting for.
If we could see these holograms between us, we will have been able to share our work with one another more naturally, more efficiently, and more productively than ever before. Humanity will have evolved slightly.
This is Hatsune Miku, Japan's sensational virtual pop star. She's released over 100,000 songs in multiple languages and performed sold-out concerts around the world. Her image has appeared in games, on TV, in car races, and is even etched on the side of a Japanese space rocket.
I came for Hatsune Miku, Carlos.
She's Lady Gaga's favorite digital pop star and opened shows for her in the US 3 years ago. Tens of thousands of fans attended her exhibition and live shows near Tokyo recently.
理想のアイドルっていうとどの曲でもミクはすごい綺麗に歌ってくれる。
他没有缺点啊，没有任何让我们感到不开心的一些新闻。
She's everything to everybody. That's probably why she's so popular.
Miku's creator Hiroyuki Ito and his Sapporo-based company have been developing the virtual diva for over 10 years.
初音ミクとはキャラクターとしてすごくYouTube とかで検索するとたくさんの初音ミクが出てくるんですけども、元々の初音ミクのその原点は歌声を合成するソフトウェアなんです。
Both the software and character are named Hatsune Miku, meaning the first sound of the future. Originally based on Yamaha's Vocaloid technology, Miku the software has a sound bank containing voice samples and a huge array of tools. You input the melody and lyrics, then Miku the character sings them. To date, Krypton has sold 120,000 software licenses at $200 each to fans around the world who use it to create numerous songs and share them online. Some of the fan-created songs are chosen to be part of Miku's concerts, for which they're paid a royalty fee.
もともと初音ミクっていう存在自体がボトムアップって言いますか、中にはアマチュアクリエイターじゃなくて今もうすでにプロになって活躍している方もいらっしゃるんですけども。
The company also has other revenue streams. It makes money from merchandising, licensing deals, and concert ticket sales. According to the real-life musicians who perform with Hatsune Miku, the virtual pop star is interesting and surprising.
今年で3年ぐらい、ちょうど3年ぐらいになってきて、ライブも数十本数百本だったと。そういうことが演奏によって起こせるためのそういう器みたいな感じになってきて。初音ミクらしさって僕はあんまりない。初音ミクって何だってありっていうか。
For Ito, Miku has the potential to change the way we think about music.
そういう新しいテクノロジーによって新しい音楽のあり方っていうものを模索していきたいと思っていました。
And for her fans, it goes even further.
初音ミクって魂がないので、だからみんな魂を作り上げるために存在している。
Now, there are a lot of fitness gadgets out there. In my quest to get fit, I tested 17 of them over the last few months. At least one personal trainer I know was a little bit skeptical.
Yeah, I've been watching these new technologies come to the market for almost as long as I've been a personal trainer. They're just tricks and tropes. They're not much different than the Bowflex machines or, to be honest, the original Jane Fonda workout video.
But some of these gadgets that are just coming to the market do so much more than what they used to do, just tracking your activities. Out of all of them, this chest strap was my favorite. It comes with a robot coach that points to the future, one where you might not need a human trainer at all. And it works like this. You wear the chest strap so that it can read your heart rate, and that connects to Move's free app that talks to you.
Welcome to Move Heart Rate Hit Outdoor Running. Let's get moving and warm up in Zone 2.
Move's computerized coach tells you what to do at that exact moment, whether you're running outside or you're doing body weight exercises indoors.
Swing your arms faster to get your legs moving quicker. Let's crush this round.
And by reading your heart rate, she knows exactly how hard you're working. She keeps you honest.
Way to go, you are in the target zone. Keep pushing, you're almost at the end of the round. Don't give up.
I've been running for 7 years now, and my biggest problem is that I never push myself hard enough. I end up going on the same slow, comfortable 30-minute jog, but the Move HR Burn blasted me out of that rut. By the end of these half-hour exercises, I was drenched in sweat in a way that I never am when I work out alone. Training with a real person is great, whether that's your group instructor or your coach or your personal trainer. But humans, they're expensive. For the rest of us, this $60 gadget is all you need.
what does it take to change the world? A big army? A cure to a pandemic? A revolution? All of these take either a lot of people, thousands of hours, or massive amounts of space. But for Julian Assange, all he needs is one room, an internet connection, and the world will listen. Assange is located here, and more specifically, right here. And from that location, he's posted government secrets, classified documents, and leaked emails from some of the world's most powerful people. And in doing so, has been labeled a hero, a villain, a nihilist, and everything in between. This is how an Australian programmer sequestered in the Ecuadorian embassy in London became one of the most influential and notorious people in the world. Born in 1971 in Townsville, Australia, Assange has always been on the move. Living in over 30 homes by the time he was in his mid-teens, Assange, along with his mother and half-brother, finally settled down in Melbourne. His introduction to hacking started at 16 when he was given a Commodore 64, which he attached to a modem. He attended the University of Melbourne, where he studied programming, physics, and mathematics. He never graduated, but that doesn't mean he didn't get an education. By 1991, Assange hacked into the Pentagon, U.S. Navy, and other branches of the U.S. government. In 1996, he was caught by the Australian Federal Police and charged with over 30 counts of hacking and computer-related crimes. He didn't get any jail time, but he was fined $2,100.
I think the first taste of what would come later was the hacking that he did as a young programmer, and that really sort of foreshadowed a healthy skepticism of the use and abuse of technology by governments.
That's Vernon Silver.
I'm a reporter for Bloomberg's investigations team.
Assange's youth as a hacker laid the foundation for him to start WikiLeaks in 2006. But what is WikiLeaks? It's a website that posts unfiltered, usually classified documents. What separates it from every other media outlet is that they have no editorial hierarchy. With a publication like the New York Times, information comes in, they take that information, package it, then disseminate it for the public to see. WikiLeaks, however, cuts out the middleman.
WikiLeaks gathers information, most of it given to them anonymously. So what they're doing is really very simple. They get the information in one end from who gives it to them and out the other with sometimes minimal interference. Julian Assange is the leader of that, the mastermind, the creator, and really, because he thinks of it as a journalistic enterprise, the editor-in-chief.
But every story starts with a source, and Assange has some unconventional sources.
Julian Assange does not hack as far as we know. He is the recipient of people who are either insiders who give him secret documents or hacked emails from a foreign power.
That's Eli Lake.
I am a columnist for Bloomberg.
And there was no source bigger for Assange than Chelsea Manning, who used to be known as U.S. soldier Bradley Manning. In 2010, Manning provided Assange and WikiLeaks with hundreds of thousands of leaked government documents. WikiLeaks quietly began releasing the documents in February of 2010, then made big headlines in April by posting what is now known as the Collateral murder video.
Come on, fire!
It was a vivid, graphic video. It changed the debate on the Iraq War, and importantly, it put WikiLeaks on the map when they put it online, and they couldn't be ignored at that point.
And those leaks were just the beginning. They went on to post more than 90,000 leaked documents known as the Afghan war logs, 390,000 documents known as the Iraq war logs, and 250,000 private messages between diplomats called cables in what is now known as Cablegate. These leaks were met with very real ethical questions.
The problem with publishing those cables was that a number of confidential sources for U.S. diplomats who faced real danger when their names were exposed.
Then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton drove the point home that
every country, including the United States, must be able to have candid conversations about the people and nations with whom they deal.
Shortly after Cablegate, the Swedish government issued an arrest warrant for Assange on allegations of rape and molestation. He claimed the allegations were fabricated to get him extradited to the United States, a claim the U.S. government denied. Either way, Assange's next move was
to seek refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy, which really was the beginning of the new chapter in his life and what we're dealing with now, which is him being stuck in London.
What was supposed to be an office in an embassy is now Assange's self-imposed prison to this very day. But that doesn't mean he's slowed down. Since being trapped in the embassy, WikiLeaks has released files about Guantanamo Bay prisoners, Syrian political figures, and the draft to the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And then came the 2016 U.S. election.
Thousands of leaked emails showed Democratic Party officials possibly plotting against Bernie Sanders in his race against Hillary Clinton.
Over the course of 68 days, WikiLeaks released 20,000 confidential Democratic National Committee emails. In terms of the presidential race, if you look right here, when Assange released the first batch of emails, Trump actually takes his first lead against Clinton.
I think we've had enough of the Clintons, in all fairness. Don't you think?
Once WikiLeaks started exposing secrets of the Democratic Party, Julian Assange became a hero to many on the right. Public opinion kind of flip-flopped.
WikiLeaks.
From the emails, we now know Hillary Clinton's campaign manager makes risotto, and also how the DNC squashed Bernie Sanders' campaign. One thing we don't know is who gave Assange the stolen emails in the first place.
Many leading Democrats say they suspect it was the Russians. They released an analysis from a private cybersecurity firm that had said it was the Russians.
But Assange claims
our source is not the Russian government, and it is not a state party.
So this is where we stand today. The public still doesn't know who provided the emails to WikiLeaks. Meanwhile, Assange is still running WikiLeaks and still releasing documents. In March 2017, he started publishing documents from the CIA's Center for Cyber Intelligence called Vault 7.
The CIA, the agency charged with finding and keeping our top secrets, can't keep its own secrets.
As long as Assange has a connection to the world, no government secret will be too far from exposure.
Julian Assange is still in the embassy. Maybe he'll leave, maybe he won't. Kind of regardless, his work has been done. He's changed the way people think about their governments, about their own secrets, about their own hackability, and really the world has changed because of him.
Expose everything you won't admit.
And action.
This entire video is based on a true story. When I do like motivational speeches or even tell myself like love yourself and you should love yourself.
This is Lily Singh.
But to fans all over the world, she's the YouTube star Superwoman.
What if everyone's a girl, Superwoman? I know we can change the world for the better, one positive day at a time.
My parents now know what I do. They didn't know what I did for a long time in the beginning of my career. I was just making videos in my room. They had no idea.
Mom, Dad, have you seen my keys? I can't find them anywhere. Because you're always on phone.
Until someone called them, like a family member from another part of Canada, was like, Canada, is your daughter making videos? And the mom was like, I don't know, Lily, are you making videos?
Just making videos grew into an entire career. Today, Lily's YouTube channel has some 12 million subscribers, over 2 billion views, and guest stars like Michelle Obama, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, and Seth Rogen.
I think a lot of young girls are raised to believe that you're going to go to school and then graduate and then get married and then get a job and then have kids.
And Lily was on that path, all the way through a psychology degree at York University in Toronto. But when she started thinking about a career,
I started to immensely panic and think something was wrong with me because I tried to figure out my life and it wasn't working in that straight line.
It was 2010, and YouTube was only 5 years old.
I thought nothing of YouTube. I was probably the last person in my circle of friends to discover YouTube. And I remember when I did, I thought, this is so strange. There's people making videos in their rooms, and other people are watching them.
So she figured, why not give it a shot?
I one day posted a video because I was sad, and I wanted to be creative and happy.
She didn't know how to edit video or write scripts, so she winged it.
It was so bad and so cringe. And my expectation was literally nothing. I was like, I'm gonna put this video up, a couple of my friends are gonna watch it, probably make fun of me, and that's gonna be the end of this. The second and third video came from, wait, 70 people watched my first one, can I get 80 to watch the next one?
She kept creating, she kept posting, and the viewers kept coming. Lily had found an audience.
A lot of the comments were, oh my God, there's a brown girl on YouTube.
More specifically, Indian. Lily's parents immigrated to Canada from India, and Lily was born and raised in Scarborough, near Toronto.
My home life was awesome. My parents, even though I portrayed them to be quite strict in my videos.
Oi, Lily, where's the rest of your skirt, huh? I teach you like this to walk around like this, showing everything to everyone?
They actually aren't like that at all. They're pretty modern and pretty cool.
Your dress is short. Don't know what for.
And were pretty lenient with me. I mean, I got away with a lot of things. I was a brat. I was a brat.
She had a different idea of what she wanted out of life than other kids. In a grade school graduation slideshow, her classmates said they wanted to be lawyers and doctors.
And then I came up and I was like, rapper.
Making out with your friends, man. But then you say that you hate hoes.
I could just feel my parents being like, why?
Because that's just not something women really did in the Singh family.
I know there was a ton of people that weren't happy about my birth being a female, so I think, and that's some real-ish, but it's a real thing. The best thing I could have done to prove to so many people that didn't want my mom to have a daughter was to become Superwoman.
What if everyone it's a girl, Superwoman?
It was the name of Lily's favorite hip-hop song by Lil Mo featuring Fabulous.
I love the song so much because it was one of the only songs at the time that was an empowering female song, where Lil Mo's going on about, like, I will save guys with my superpowers, and I will save girls with my superpowers, and I am the Superwoman. I thought, this name that I've had for so long that empowered me when I was younger, I'm gonna make this my screen name.
Maybe this should be a new series.
Superwoman didn't just burst onto the scene overnight with a viral video. It was a steady climb fueled by hard work.
The moment that I thought this is going somewhere and this could be a career was the first time I performed internationally. It was in India. And it was the first time where I was truly across the world and people knew my videos.
Singh has transformed herself from a bratty kid to an internet personality to a media mogul. She starred in a feature film, A Trip to Unicorn Island, in 2016. And her book, How to Be a Boss, hit the New York Times bestseller list in 2017 while she was on a 30-city international tour. Lily started out with the goal of getting millions of subscribers and financial security.
Hurry the hell up!
But after surpassing those goals, success has new meaning.
I've really come to terms with the fact that my definition of success is what's the best legacy I can leave behind. And it's not the number of views and the number of subscribers. It is the number of people that can say, this girl changed my life or changed something in my life positively.
CTE is often found in the brains of deceased athletes, military veterans, and others with a history of repetitive brain trauma. Hundreds have donated their brains to the VA Boston University Concussion Legacy Foundation Brain Bank.
This is a former NFL player who died in his early 70s, and this is a veteran who also died in his early 70s.
Dr. Ann McKee dissects these brains.
The hippocampus and the mammillary bodies are very important for memory. I can see that they're slightly affected.
McKee recently dissected the brain of former New England Patriots player Aaron Hernandez, who was convicted of murder and later committed suicide.
You'll see right away that the brain is showing signs of shrinkage. You can see the crevices in the brain that you can't see in the normal.
McKee says Hernandez's severe case of CTE impacted his decision-making, depression, and ability to control rage and aggression. Right now, she thinks we're underestimating how many people have CTE.
We were able to distinguish between CTE and controls and CTE and Alzheimer's disease. The next question is, can we do this in the blood, and can we do this in living people? And we aren't there yet with those answers.
But the need for a diagnosis in the living is motivating companies such as Quanterix in Lexington, Massachusetts, to work faster on technology that could diagnose concussions and CTE in as few as 30 minutes. Kevin Rosovsky is the CEO.
It's like a high-powered microscope. And so by doing that, we can see little biomarkers that you couldn't see before in the blood.
Quanterix received a grant from the NFL and just went public. Since then, its stock is up more than 40%. The company sells a machine called Simoa for $175,000 to other biotechs, hospitals, and researchers.
And for the first time in history, we're able to see brain health in blood, and that's a major breakthrough, and that's leading to less invasive testing, and we've already been able to see evidence of concussions, and there's the beginning evidence of being able to see the accumulated effect of concussions.
Quanterix is also trying to detect Alzheimer's disease, multiple sclerosis, and ALS. Rosovsky says he thinks diagnosing concussions will be easier than diagnosing CTE.
Diagnosing CT in the living probably is a couple years away. We're real excited to see the progress, but reducing some of that work into actual tests in a laboratory takes time. There's regulatory approvals. There's a lot of red tape that you have to go through.
Also in this race to diagnose CTE in the blood are Athlon Medical and Exosome Sciences. And New York's Mount Sinai Hospital is scanning for the disease in the living. But it's just one step in a series of questions for those with serious head trauma. There's still no cure for CTE.
Even if we had a great idea for a treatment, there's no way to test whether it's effective or not. So that's the enormous advance that we'll get if we can develop a biomarker for this disease.
In Boston, Ann Mostu, Bloomberg News.
Wine is a $300 billion global industry where one person's opinion can make fortunes or break them. That's because of this man, Robert Parker, and his newsletter, The Wine Advocate. For 3 decades, he dominated as the world's most influential wine critic. Now Parker's protege is building an empire of his own. Antonio Galloni runs Venice.
Antonio, tell me, what are you trying to build at Venice?
Well, at Venice, we started with the idea in 2013 of building a world-class platform. We have a database of about 250,000 professionally written reviews. On Delectable, we have 7 million user reviews. Through Delectable, we also have a partnership with Whole Foods and several other partnerships that we can't announce just yet. And when you put that all together, what we have is something that no other company in our space can even come close to.
Do you think of yourself as the next Parker?
Not at all.
Why?
Because Steve Jobs said you can't live your life trying to be somebody else. So he's one of my biggest influences, and I've never wanted to be a replica of somebody else because a replica is never as good as the original. Bob is a genius, fantastic, one of a kind. We're going to be something completely different, and I have no desire to be some version of somebody else.
Different in what way?
Every decision that I've made at this company is completely anathemic to what Bob did with his company. I want our writers to be partners. All of my senior people are locked into the company. They all have equity or they have a path to equity based on business results. That's something that we never had at Parker. Our benefits are world-class, and everything that we've done at Venice is completely different from that model. When Steve Tanzer, who is the most experienced active wine critic in America, wants to work with us, that says something. When Alessandro Masnaghetti, who's the best cartographer of vineyards, wants to work with us, that says something. When Neil Martin, who's a superstar wine critic with enormous experience in Bordeaux and Burgundy and the former lead critic at The Advocate, wants to come and be part of our team, that says something.
You make it sound like The Wine Advocate was a disaster as a company and a miserable experience as an employee.
No, it was great because I got to work with Bob Parker when he was at his prime, you know, and Bob was like a second father to me, and we talked on the phone all the time, and he gave me great advice.
Can anyone's palate dominate the wine criticism business the way Parker's did? And should anyone's palate dominate it the way his did?
I just think the world is very different today. You know, I mean, it's just a totally different world. It's probably not healthy to have a single person dominating the world.
It's not even wine criticism, it's the wine industry.
Yeah, that's probably not the healthiest thing in the world. But I think that there's just such an opportunity right now with social media and technology to reach such a massive number of people that I think it's possible that 1 or 2 people will actually have more influence than Bob Parker did, because they will, again, this goes back to your first question, not trying to be a version of somebody else. You see this in sports all the time. It's like, oh, well, nobody will ever beat this record. And then somebody comes along, you know, it was like tennis, Pete Sampras. Nobody's ever going to win as many Grand Slams. Now you have 2 guys who are ahead of that and 1 knocking on the door. And so I think a lot like that.
You're a former investment banker. How does that inform and influence what you're doing and what you've done?
My generation has had to deal with a lot more challenges. That's why I think we're actually much better poised for the future. My first job in finance, the first thing that happened was long-term capital, 1998. Then the tech bubble melted down. Then there was a mutual fund trading scandal. You know, that was all like within about 5 or 6 years. And these are the things that I had to deal with as a young executive. My peers who were 20 years older didn't know how to manage in crisis. They'd only seen Black Monday. They'd just been in a big bull market. It's very different. So I'm very lucky. People of my generation or a little bit younger have actually had to deal with a lot more crises. I think that's actually good for learning how to cope with challenges in business.
From the outside, it kind of looks like you're trying to demolish the house that Parker built, right? You left The Wine Advocate.
Yeah.
You merged with one of his chief rivals.
Yeah.
And you just hired his successor, Neil Martin.
Mm-hmm.
So are you?
I think what that says is that all the best people want to work at our company. And that's really what we strive to create starting in 2013. We wanted to create a world-class company that would attract the best-in-class talent, not just on the content side, on the technology side, on the digital side, our office, and at every level, what we're trying to, we only hire superstars, and we're looking for those superstars. In the world of professional wrestling, there's something called a swerve.
Hulk Hogan has betrayed WCW!
Some examples. These tag team partners are called babyfaces, or the good guys. Then one of them swerves when he super kicks his tag team partner in the head, quickly assuming the role of the bad guy, or what the wrestling world calls the heel.
Are you kidding? What a despicable act that...
Or a match is almost lost when, what's that? The super wrestler appears out of nowhere sprinting down the aisle to save the match.
That's the Warriors music! It's the Ultimate Warrior!
That's a swerve. So it should go as no surprise that World Wrestling Entertainment, known as the WWE, the most popular brand of sports entertainment in the world, is prepared for any swerves that come their way. So here's the story of how the WWE learned to see the swerve coming. So I spoke to Bloomberg reporters Felix Gillette.
I'm a writer for Bloomberg News for the Global team.
And Kim Basine.
And I'm the U.S. luxury reporter at Bloomberg.
To find out exactly how the WWE is positioning itself for an all-out global invasion, which starts with a massive change to their lucrative pay-per-view model.
WWE basically pioneered the pay-per-view model on cable. I mean, when the pay-per-view events came up, all of our friends would scramble around and try and get one of the parents to pay for it.
But in 2014, they took a huge risk.
They saw a little bit than some of the other entertainment brands that where this whole thing was moving was away from cable and satellite television and towards on-demand streaming video apps. They made this risky decision, in essence, cannibalizing that pay-per-view model, which they had.
And after some early turbulence, it's working. Roughly 1.5 million people are paying $9.99 a month for the WWE app, making it the 5th most popular streaming OTT service. This adapt or die approach is in the WWE's DNA. Over the past 30 years, the company always seems to think 2 steps ahead. In the early 90s,
WWE was at its most when Ted Turner took them on with WCW,
which stands for World Championship Wrestling. And back then, the WCW was winning the ratings war. So in order to compete with them,
WWE had changed its product from a family-friendly kind of cartoonish style to this really raw. That's why they called their show Raw. It was this style of wrestling.
With violent, outrageous, reality-inspired plot lines and aggressive personas.
From a 16-foot ladder!
And they won that fight against Ted Turner. And they bought WCW.
The early 2000s ushered in an era of testosterone-driven programs aimed at the red-blooded American male.
Bra and panties matches, and people smash each other over their head with like barbed wire bats and things like that.
Until 2015, when WWE fans started a hashtag #GiveDivas a Chance. Since then, WWE has hired more female wrestlers, and that growing cast of female characters was part of a much larger plan.
They started to try to appeal to a broader set of people.
Let's attract more female fans. And after we've attracted fans, let's attract more international fans. They're broadening their base, and they're doing that in large part to make it more advertising friendly.
And not just friendly to advertisers.
They're trying to build up their fan base in China. They're trying to build a fan base in Europe. They, already have a pretty good fan base in India.
India is a place where they already have an established wrestling culture.
Because of the gigantic Indian wrestler, the Great Khali. But there's still a lot of work to do. While the WWE set a revenue record in 2017, only 30% of it is coming from an overseas audience. And there's one person whose responsibility is to grow that number.
Eventually stops at Vince McMahon, no matter what's happening within WWE.
Yeah, he's a very controlling guy, and it's a very, very, very tightly company.
All the way down the board to the big stars' entrance music. And their outfits and things like that.
So with a CEO like McMahon is planning 2 moves ahead and an aggressive push into multiple international markets, a big issue is money.
It's hard to do all those things simultaneously without committing a huge amount of capital to it.
And that's where the WWE becomes an attractive company for buyers.
Potentially, one thing that could WWE is they could benefit by being acquired by a bigger technology or telecom company, an Amazon or Facebook or a 21st Century Fox.
So with a market cap of $2.8 billion, the advantage of owning 100% of their own content, and a rapid consolidation spreading throughout the entertainment industry, it looks like the WWE is well positioned, even if swerves ahead.
Our world is changing. Every day, it changes a little faster. Some changes are too small to see. Others, too big to handle. Sometimes, change feels slow. So slow, we don't even notice. Other times, it happens all at once. For our climate, change means many things. And between too small to see and too big to handle, there is a whole world of difference. The clock is ticking. This is Bloomberg Green.
Saving the seas. This week, the deep-sea diver who stopped writing the ocean's obituary to find a solution. Enric Sala tells us why the next 10 years matter most. And globalization needs to get greener. Shipping accounts for nearly an eighth of all transport emissions. How can the industry clean up its act? Plus, protecting coastlines comes at a huge environmental cost. But one Israeli startup found a way to keep the sea out and the animals in. From London, I'm Anne-Marie Hordern, and this is Bloomberg Green. After more than a decade of studying the ocean as an academic, Enric Sala realized he was writing the ocean's obituary. He quit his job and became a full-time conservationist. As an in-house explorer for National Geographic, he's clocked more than 5,000 open water dives. He's also founded Pristine Seas, a project that combines exploration, research, and media to lobby countries to protect their oceans. To date, it has helped create marine reserves equivalent to half the size of Canada. I spoke to him about his mission and why it's so urgent.
The state of the world's oceans is really bad. We have lost 90% of the large fish in the ocean. Sharks, groupers, cod, tuna. More than half of the fish stocks are overfished, which means that we are taking them out of the water faster than they can reproduce. More than half of the ocean is affected by industrial fishing, and global warming is killing coral reefs all around the world. The ocean is in a trajectory of decline.
Can you just visualize for our viewers who never get to see the kind of things you are able to see, what an ocean and healthy ecosystem looks like versus one that's next to a bustling economic and industrialized area?
Coral reefs in the United States, in the Florida Keys, are down to only 2% of what they used to be. Before, 80 to 90% of the bottom on a coral reef in the Caribbean was covered by live coral. Now, Florida Keys have only 2%. The average in the Caribbean is about 5% of the bottom covered by live coral. The rest is covered by slime and seaweed. And most of the fish you can see are this big. And it is very, very rare that if you jump into any place in the Caribbean at random, you see a shark. It's very, very rare. Now, let's go to Millennium Atoll, for example. An atoll that is uninhabited and fished south of the equator in the Central Pacific, belongs to the Republic of Kiribati. 2009, we conducted the first underwater expedition to this island, and I still remember the first time. Jumped over the side of the boat, and as soon as the bubbles cleared, I was surrounded by 15 gray reef sharks. After a couple minutes, the sharks decided that we were boring, and they went back to do their thing. And you look down, 90% of the seafloor is covered by thriving coral, and it's full of fish, and a sea turtle comes by. Now, this abundance that we rarely see anywhere except in well-managed marine reserves. This is what the ocean used to be like, and this is what we have learned from going to these pristine places.
And you write in your book that you're writing the obituary of ocean life. What's the cure?
The cure is doing less harm. Basically, there are three things that we are doing to the ocean. One is we are taking fish out of the water faster than they can reproduce. Two, we are turning the ocean warmer and more acidic because of man-made climate change. And three, we are throwing in everything that we don't want, our waste and our plastic. We need basically to reverse these trends.
Does this mean that a lot of this falls to governments and their policies?
That's a big part of it, because it is governments that regulate fishing and mineral extraction and oil extraction. It is governments that have the legal authority to create large marine reserves in the ocean. But also, local communities have an important role to play, because some of the most successful protected areas in the ocean are community-led and community-managed marine reserves. So when the fish come back, the divers come in. And that creates huge economic opportunities through ecotourism. These areas that are managed by communities are very successful because the communities have a vested interest in having as many fish as possible inside them so they can enjoy the benefits.
What from the pandemic has changed your view when it comes to protection of the environment?
Nature has given us a very strong signal of how fast it can recover if we just give it space. Everybody was fascinated by all these videos of the whales and the dolphins coming into marinas, and mountain lions on the streets of Santiago in Chile, wild goats in the UK. Nature has this extraordinary ability to bounce back if we just give it space. This is why we need to protect at least 30% of the planet by 2030.
How do healthy marine ecosystems help in the fight against climate change, though?
Most people see the ocean as a victim of climate change, but the ocean can also be a solution, because we know that the more life that is in the ocean, like big fish and big whales, the more these organisms help to make the ocean productive and absorb more CO2. The kelp forest, seagrass beds, all of these are important ecosystems in the ocean that are similar to the forest on the land, that capture a lot of our carbon pollutions.
What are you most excited about in your field?
We have 10 years to fix this problem. Global fisheries catch is going down, stocks are collapsing. Business as usual means that by 2050, 90% of the coral reefs are gone, that most commercial fisheries have collapsed. That affects food security, that affects migration of people. We have 10 years to get to peak greenhouse gas emissions and then go carbon neutral by 2050. And we have 10 years to protect at least 30% of the ocean so we can restore much of this health and productivity, not just for saving biodiversity, but also saving our life support system. We are not talking about something that is apart from us. We are not apart from nature. We are a part of nature. So these 10 years are probably the most critical in the history of humanity.
The most accurate measurements of changing oceans will come from space. While Enric Sala explores what lies beneath, a new satellite is giving us data from above.
We'll learn more about our oceans and climate change, but from space. A new satellite's been launched from California. Its mission: track the accelerating rise of sea levels.
Well, the main instruments on board include a dual-frequency radar altimeter. And this is the primary instrument of the mission, and that's the one that's measuring sea surface height, significant wave height, and wind speed over the ocean. And from those measurements, we can actually have the superb measurements that we expect of sea level rise.
Data gathered from Sentinel-6 will be used alongside information from other satellites to build as complete a picture of the oceans as possible.
With a long record, we can precisely measure the acceleration. We eventually can detect new regime, tipping points. For example, if there is a runaway in the melting of Greenland or Antarctica, sea level will record this runaway change because it is an integrator of all changes that are occurring in the climate system. So we will be able to see some change, big change in the global climate.
The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration expects that sea level rise will increasingly threaten U.S. coastlines. One example, the southern tip of Manhattan is expected to flood 20 to 40 times a year by 2030.
11 of the 15 largest megacities are located at the coast, and this number will double. The number of people living in coastal area will double by 2060. So, knowing how much sea level is rising at the coast and how much it will rise in the future in coastal areas is as obvious. It's obviously a major goal for human beings.
Coming up, from sales to steam to oil, the shipping industry is no stranger to change. But how will it navigate the next transition? This is Bloomberg Green. From Bloomberg's European headquarters in London, I'm Anne-Marie Hordern. This is Bloomberg Green. Now, for your roundup of this week's latest climate news, Jennifer Zabazaja has your Green in Brief.
Here's the climate news you need to know. Deforestation of the world's largest rainforest has hit a 12-year high. More than 4,000 square miles of the Amazon rainforest was destroyed in 2020. That's a 9.5% increase from a year earlier. Government data shows that destruction has soared since President Jair Bolsonaro took office and weakened environmental enforcement. The Amazon is home to millions of species and plants and is critical in the fight against climate change. Bitcoin is hitting all-time highs, but at what cost to the environment? The cryptocurrency is energy intensive, and there are concerns if it becomes mainstream. According to MIT, back in 2018, Bitcoin's carbon footprint was almost as big as Portugal's. Want to get better at tackling climate change? We'll hire more women. That's according to Bloomberg New Energy Finance. Firms with 30% or more women in top jobs tend to perform better when it comes to the environment and are more likely to set clear climate goals. Shopping online is more popular than ever now, but the price of convenience is measured in CO2, and more deliveries means more fuel burned and more packaging wasted. So what can companies do? Well, many are becoming more efficient and sourcing more clean energy for their data centers and warehouses. And England's farmers will be paid to go green after Brexit. As European subsidies are phased out, they'll get new money to encourage them to produce healthy, sustainable food. Poor farming practices are one of the leading drivers of water pollution and the loss of biodiversity. I'm Jennifer Zabazaja in New York. Anne-Marie, back to you.
The shipping industry is more than just the grease on the wheels of globalization. It's its chief enabler. 11 billion tons of goods are transported by ship each year, the biggest contributors being 2 billion tons of oil, 1 billion tons of iron ore, and 350 million tons of grain. According to the International Chamber of Shipping, 80% of Europe's imports and exports happen over the seas. And for such a vast industry, it also contributes its fair share of emissions. Shipping makes up 12% of global transport energy consumption. So how does it clean up its act? Earlier, I caught up with Bloomberg Green reporter Laura Milan about just how big of a challenge this is going to be for the industry.
One of the main issues is size. So about 90% of the world's cargo is moved by ships. So obviously changing such a huge industry is not going to be fast, and it's not going to be easy. The second issue has to do with technology. So ships obviously travel for many days at sea. It's not as easy for them to refuel as it would be for a car, for example, going on a road. And the sector still hasn't found a technology that's economically viable and that's zero emissions, an equivalent to the electric batteries for cars, for example.
But actions are being put in place to make the industry a bit more environmentally friendly. Walk us through those steps that they're taking.
That's it. So there's a first step that would involve using low emission fuels or biofuels that would significantly reduce the existing emissions. And then at a regulatory level, when it comes to the policy and the governments, there are steps being made as well. I would say that the most significant ones come from the European Union, which started to track emissions a few years ago and is now looking to include shipping emissions in the emissions trading system. So that would significantly reduce and help calculate the emissions from the shipping industry. Now, China is taking similar steps. So at the moment, regions need to report shipping emissions to the central government. And finally, we have the International Maritime Organization with a pledge to reduce shipping emissions by 50% in 2050. Now, we must say that that pledge has been considered insufficient by environmental groups, but at least some steps are being taken.
So to get to 2050, the industry obviously is going to need to start tapping some new technologies. What new technologies are you seeing being introduced into the shipping industry?
So we have seen pilot technologies being developed for years now, but what's interesting about this current moment is that we're seeing big players invest in these technologies that are not yet economically viable, but that one day might be. So for example, we are seeing earlier this year, the world's largest agricultural commodities trader, Cargill, saying they will invest in attaching sails to their ships so they can make any technology that they run their ships on more efficient. Similarly, we have seen a spin-off of Airbus, the aeronautics company, developing a similar application with kites. We have been following also developments in hydrogen. So at the moment, hydrogen fuel seems like a good option, a possible option when it has been developed and when it becomes economically viable. And we have Vestas, for example, the world's largest turbine maker, developing some ships that will be able to run on hydrogen in the near future.
Coming up, rising sea levels means humans need to get creative when it comes to coastal defenses. But how do we protect both ourselves and the environment? One Israeli startup may have the answer. That's coming up next. This is Bloomberg Green. In London, I'm Anne-Marie Hordern. This is Bloomberg Green. After water, what's the resource that humans use the most? It's concrete, 3 tons a year for every person on the planet. And engineers estimate it's used twice as much as all other building materials combined. And it comes with a huge environmental cost. Concrete, not just in cities, it's a common feature on our coastlines too. And that's taking a toll on biodiversity. But one Israeli startup has found a way of making sea defenses stronger and encouraging life to thrive.
If you take a look at concrete structures like breakwaters or seawalls, the water around them is often clear. That's not actually a good thing, because it means there's no life. Marine species are actually most abundant in coastal areas, but it's also where us humans prefer to live too. So when we build here, we drive away marine life.
The concrete in the marine world has a lot of additives, a lot of chemicals, and some of those materials are actually leaching out, and they're actually prohibiting marine life to thrive. If we keep developing without any regards to natural communities, there is a tilting point from which beyond we cannot really go back.
In the coastal city of Tel Aviv, an Israeli startup wants to revolutionize our urban coastlines. Their sea defenses are transforming lifeless man-made structures into teeming ecosystems. They do this by replacing standard concrete with their own special cement formulas.
As opposed to regular cement-based concrete, e-concrete includes certain elements that enhance the growth of marine flora and fauna of plants and animals. Our admix, which is kind of our secret sauce, is basically kind of sealing the concrete, making it less aggressive for the marine environment. That once we add it, we enable life to flourish.
In the lab, the team run tests to identify what mixes will work best for marine life.
So we take really ice cube sized concrete slabs of different compositions, and we put larvae, 20, 30, 50. We need to have a lot of replicates. We're geeky scientists, so we have to have a lot of replication and controls. And then within a few days or just a few weeks, we can get an answer on their preference. So obviously if they die, they have a very low tolerance to that specific concrete mix design. And if they thrive or they flourish, we can quantify that very quickly.
E-concrete says it typically sees double the biodiversity of regular grey concrete. From fish and sea caterpillars on their armour blocks to crabs on these tidal pools that sit on the shoreline.
This unit holds water during the low tide, so it's always moist, and therefore it has a very comfortable habitat for crabs and sea anemones and sea stars, etc. These pools have been here for less than 3 months, and this is already what you can see. It's covered with life. See the rock around it, which has been here for probably 10, 20, maybe even more years, only has a thin layer of green algae, and that's it.
As well as the composition of the cement mix, E-concrete designs its products specifically to the marine environment it will be deployed, to create niches for endangered species, or to develop nurseries like these oyster beds. The final part of the equation is creating complex surface textures to mimic natural rock or coral, an environment that helps anchor young organisms.
When concrete elements are being cast, the typical goal is to have a very slick surface, very, very smooth. The idea is to get the water to flow right across it. When we're designing e-concrete with a rough surface, we want to do the complete opposite. We want to slow the water when they are crossing the structure so that the larvae can actually adhere and attach to the surface.
E-concrete has to offer its clients more than just ecological credentials. Over time, they've discovered that creating hospitable habitats for marine life adds another advantage, one that is surely hard to ignore.
We've seen evidence to the fact that the growth of the organisms on the concrete create kind of a layer of defense. Just the addition of weight, we can actually gain stability and strength over time.
This is let's say the unit when we put it in the water. And this is after a year in the water. And what you can see here is all the oysters are completely covering it. We designed the units so they can withstand the forces and perform in terms of structural performance, but they can also be a backbone for ecological enhancement.
The company tests its miniature designs in tanks full of real seawater, rocks, plants, and animal life from around the world.
What we're looking for is the accumulation of calcium carbonate on the surface of the concrete of different mixes and different designs. This is the process that we call biogenic buildup. So with time, we get a buildup of calcium carbonate that is sourced from marine organisms on the surface of the concrete. And we actually encapsulate the concrete with a natural rock. So when the organism die, in the case of a coral, it will die, and then another coral will sit on it, and that's how a reef is growing.
The hope that our man-made structures could become stronger over time also means better economics.
The units require less maintenance and could therefore stay in the water for longer. E-concrete, though, is just a few years old, so it needs more time to really quantify the longevity of its products. But the company are certain their products are better for the environment, and not just in terms of improving biodiversity.
We're kind of trying to offset some of that immense carbon footprint of the concrete industry.
Construction is responsible for about 11% of global carbon emissions. By adding a biological crust to their products, e-concrete prevents some CO2 from being released into the atmosphere.
For every kilogram of calcium carbonate being created by those marine organisms, we're offsetting 120 grams of CO2. So think about building a port infrastructure or a city waterfront that is an active carbon sink. I think that's a great advantage of the technology.
That does it for this week, but let's keep the conversation going on Twitter. Follow us at Climate. I'm Anne-Marie Hordern, and this is Bloomberg Green.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Bloomberg Quick Takes Tim Stenovic on Bloomberg Radio.
And a very good afternoon, everyone. Live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. Streaming on YouTube, it is Tuesday, March 23rd, 2020. 1 year since the stock market bottomed out as a result of the pandemic.
Where were you when that happened?
Where was I?
Were you here?
At home.
So was I.
I think I was at home.
And it was wild. I was watching it play out on TV, on my computer monitors, not from the floor of the New York Stock Exchange where I usually was at that time.
Yeah.
Because it was closed.
No, it was, I got to tell you, there was a point where when everything was shutting down there, everybody was like, let's clear out the office. Let's get everybody home as quickly as possible.
I don't want to clarify. The New York Stock Exchange wasn't closed.
No.
Journalists access to the stock exchange. Like, we weren't going there.
Buildings just shut down.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to be talking about that. We're going to also be talking about, I'm just going to put this out there, Krispy Kreme. If you've had a vaccine, folks, you get a free donut every day.
Yum, yum. No comment about comorbidities, okay?
I was gonna say,
I'm
what?
going to just leave it there.
Trade one problem for another. Don't go there. All right, let's get you going on this Tuesday with a check on the trading day. Here is Charlie Pellet.
Hi, thank you very much. And here's what's going on. We've got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all trading lower right now. Investors weighing optimism over economic growth with concern that rising virus cases and a lockdown in Germany signals the global reopening will be delayed. S&P 500 index has been fluctuating as worldwide deaths and cases creep higher. Right now, S&P lower by 0.2%, down 8 points at 39.31. The Dow down 134. That is a drop of 0.4%. NASDAQ down 60, a drop now of just about 0.5%. 10-year yield 1.64%. NASDAQ 100 index little changed, up now by less than 0.1%. Gold down $11 the ounce, down 0.7%, $17.27 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude down 5.6%, $58.10 a barrel. After the bell, we will be hearing from GameStop. Shares now lower by just about 2.7%. Keep in mind that for the year, this stock is up more than 900%. While we're checking GameStop, some of the other recent Reddit high flyers include AMC Entertainment, plunging today by 11.6%. Costs, the headphone company, down now by 10.5%. Recapping, S&P down 8, drop there of 0.2%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thanks for the setup. And now let's get to the Market Drivers Report.
While we're seeing signs of recovery, we should be clear-eyed about the hole we're digging out of. The country is still down nearly 10 million jobs from its pre-pandemic peak.
And of course, that's former Fed chief and now U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. She, along with the current Fed chief, Jay Powell, appearing before the House Financial Services Committee today. It's still ongoing as we speak. So let's get into it, set the Business Week agenda, because that's certainly part of our market conversation on this Tuesday. Carl Riccadonna is chief U.S. economist at Bloomberg Economics on the phone in New Jersey. Dave Wilson, stocks editor at Bloomberg News on the remote access from New Jersey. Carl, let me start with you because markets, at least the equity side, not doing too much today, and we'll get to Dave in a second. But what do we need to know, if anything, in particular, from Jay Powell and Janet Yellen today?
Well, I think, good afternoon, Carol.
Hi.
Tim. The news is that there's not significant new news from Chair Powell and Secretary Yellen. And that certainly is relevant in this environment because we have a fast-changing economy that really is accelerating on $1.9 trillion of stimulus. So this is going to have to be an agile Fed and Treasury that responds to very rapidly changing conditions. We're going from the deepest recession on record last year at this time to now the fastest pace of growth since probably the early 1980s or possibly even well before that. If we're growing around 8% this year. My team's looking for about 7.7% growth. So not a lot of news, but what the news was is that both Secretary Yellen and Chair Powell still are very much focused on economic scarring and the individuals who are being left behind in this K-shaped recovery and the potential long-term consequences of that. And they want to avoid the mistakes of the last economic cycle where there wasn't enough stimulus applied and basically we exited from those accommodative policies a little bit too rapidly and we paid a price as a result. So they are once bitten, twice shy on that front and still very much holding to that script even while the prospect for the economy brightens.
Hey, Carl, what can the way that lawmakers are questioning, what they're asking, what members of the House Financial Services Committee questions are, what does that tell you about what they're focused on?
Well, I think what we're seeing is a lot of political grandstanding ahead of this next phase of federal spending, which would be an infrastructure initiative.
Right.
The price tag being touted is something in the vicinity of $3 trillion. And so we can see very much folks lining up on partisan lines, Republicans against tax increases and raising the question, how will you pay for the $3 trillion? And Democrats talking about the need for that type of infrastructure investment. So we already see the battle lines very much are hardening.
Seen this movie before. Dave Wilson, come on in. The equity trade, we're moving towards our worst levels of the session, and it's definitely more of a risk-off trade today.
It definitely is. I mean, one thing that's interesting about if you go through the 11 main industry groups in the S&P 500, you see that the winners this quarter are down today. I mean, you look at raw material producers, industrial companies, financial companies, all lower. And then on the other hand, some areas that haven't done so well this quarter, are showing some life. Utility stocks and the makers of consumer staples, food, beverage, tobacco. And where utilities go, real estate tends to follow, and that's the case today as well. You're talking about interest rate sensitive groups there, and you got bond yields off a bit, and that's certainly been a story of this quarter, the way that the yields have picked up. And so you're seeing the shares kind of follow the lead of what's happening in the bond market, at least those rate-sensitive kinds of securities here.
So what are traders paying attention to? Are they concerned about worldwide deaths and cases creeping higher, Germany on a stricter lockdown coming up, or are they watching testimony from Fed Chair Powell and Treasury Secretary Yellen?
Well, given the back and forth today, I'd say that they're watching those things and a whole lot more. That's sort of where we are at this point. S&P 500's been within a range of about a 0.5 percentage point all day. And you don't see that very often. At least you haven't this quarter. You tended to see bigger moves on an intraday basis. And so, it's a market kind of playing itself out here.
Hey, Carl, just quickly, data points that you're watching. We just got, last week was the last Fed meeting, but are there economic data points that you're watching to figure out, okay, everything's going like it should be and we're not worried about inflation, or, ooh, maybe the Fed could be a little late to this party?
Well, the big data point that we'll be focusing on is a week from Friday when we get the first look at the March jobs report, and we're expecting a very big number on that front. In the interim, we're kind of caught in a predicament here where a lot of the economic data for February is kind of the lull between two waves of stimulus, the January stimulus package and now rebate checks already being sent for the month of March as of mid-month. So a lot of the February data, which is kind of what we're in the middle of right now, not all that useful. That being said, though, this week, I would say on Friday, the income and spending data will give us a little bit more clarity on how households are allocating those checks. Are they spending them? Are they saving them? How are they responding to these rounds of stimulus?
All right, good. A nice list for us to keep an eye on. Carl Riccadonna, Chief U.S. Economist at Bloomberg Economics. Dave Wilson, stock setter. He'll be back a little bit later on with his stock and chart of the day.
Let's do the Bloomberg Business Week Bite of the Day. It's one number that tells us a lot. Brought to you by GEP. GEP helps businesses transform supply chains with strategy, managed services, and AI-based cloud-native software. Learn more at GEP.com.
All right, today's number. It's an easy one. It's a low one. It's a little one. It's number 1. Columbus, Ohio took the number 1 spot in a ranking of 2021's best cities for water quality. This is according to Law and Starter. Columbus performing well in consumer satisfaction with overall water quality, natural hazards risk, and shares of homes with sewage disposal breakdowns. St. Petersburg, Florida, Aurora, Colorado, Frisco, Texas, and Overland Park, Kansas, rounding out the top 5 cities on the list. I don't see anything in New Jersey.
Here's my question. How are the bagels?
That's right. You want a good bagel, you got to come to New York because of the New York water.
Or so they say.
All I know is I grew up in New Jersey, northern New Jersey, drank the tap water all the time, and it was just fine.
Yeah, tap water's great here in New York City.
All right, let's get to world and national news. Over to Nancy Lyons in D.C. Hey, Nance.
Hey, Carol. Police have identified a 21-year-old, Ahmad Alissa, as the suspect in the killing of 10 people at a Boulder, Colorado supermarket yesterday. Governor Jared Polis spoke at a news conference this morning.
My heart aches today, and I think all of ours does, as Coloradans, as Americans, for this senseless tragedy.
Polis says they will hold, quote, the evildoer responsible. Authorities say the victims were men and women between the ages of 20 and 65. The suspect is expected to be released from the hospital sometime later today after being treated for a leg wound. He faces 10 counts of murder. Well, President Biden is urging Congress to take action quickly to curb the wave of gun violence that has resulted in 2 mass shootings in a week.
The Senate should immediately pass. Let me say it again. The United States Senate, I hope some are listening, should immediately pass the 2 House-passed bills that close loopholes in the background check system.
Biden also offered his condolences to the families of the Boulder victims. Michael Bloomberg, the founder and majority owner of Bloomberg LP, the parent of Bloomberg Radio, is a donor to groups that support gun control, including Everytown for Gun Safety. Pfizer says it has begun human safety testing of a new pill to treat the coronavirus. It could be used at the first sign of illness. If it does succeed in trials, the pill could be prescribed early on in an infection to block viral replication before patients get very sick. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Nancy Lyons. This is Bloomberg.
All right, Nance, thank you so much. So listen, I love this story, and we're going to talk about it with our next guest, Tim. When it comes to COVID and vaccine headlines, this one really the top of the list. Pfizer saying it has begun human safety testing of a new pill to treat the coronavirus that could be used at the first sign of illness. So basically, prescribed early on in the infection, it could block viral replication before patients got really, really sick. So really just kind of shut it down.
Yeah, the way it works, the drug binds to an enzyme called a protease and keeps the virus from replicating. Protease-inhibiting medicines have been successful in treating other types of viruses, including hepatitis C, as well as HIV.
If this was an animation,
yeah,
like my head would be exploding, because this is like a big, or could be a big deal.
It could be a huge deal, and I think about this from the perspective not just of vaccines, right, preventing us from getting COVID, but from the perspective of how treatments for it have improved just over the last year and how they could improve going forward. If this is going to be endemic, indeed, as you know, professionals have told us over and over again, doctors have told us over and over again, we're not going to eradicate this thing. We need to learn how to live with it. Treatment's a big part of that.
And listen, they say easy-to-use treatments are lacking for early-stage COVID-19 patients, and this is what we're talking about. Just as like at the beginning of the signs, like knock it out, and just think about what this could potentially do and mean going forward in terms of treatment for that. So that's definitely on our radar. We've also been tracking some of the headlines. Texas to allow shots for all adults. You and I were talking when we came in here that it does feel like it is opening up pretty rapidly.
Yeah, people in my orbit are starting to be able to get shots. People who I didn't think would be able to get shots for weeks now, which is just fantastic news. At the same time, you're seeing states actually drop the limit completely. More than half a dozen states have done that. Texas just among the latest, Arizona as well, Alaska there too.
Right. And then meantime, you've got Germany imposing a hard lockdown over Easter to try to reverse a wave of infections. Listen, this is like the race against the clock, or the vaccine clock, the idea of getting those vaccines out. We know Europe has had a much more problematic way of kind of getting these out. Part of it was, I think they were relying a lot on Astrazeneca, and that kind of hasn't fallen into place.
Yeah, and I think one thing, you know, we think about our homes a lot when we're talking about these stories, even though it's a global story. One thing that concerns me is what happens in Europe could start to happen here just a few weeks later.
Exactly. You're listening to Bloomberg Radio.
events, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Bloomberg World Headquarters. I'm Charlie Pellet. We begin with a headline from the Bloomberg Professional Service. Netherlands is extending its lockdown until April 20th. The nation's prime minister telling its citizens not to travel abroad until May 15th. It is a down day on Wall Street right now. Equities are slipping. Companies that would benefit from an end to lockdowns faring the worst amid concern that rising virus cases and new restrictions in Germany signal the global reopening will be delayed. Cruise line stocks here in the U.S. being hit especially hard. Carnival Corp down 7.2%. Royal Caribbean down 5.9%. Norwegian Cruise Line Holdings down 6.2%. And TripAdvisor moving lower now by 6.8%. S&P 500 index and the Russell 2000 both trading lower. The S&P is down by 0.1% right now. The Russell down 2.4%. NASDAQ is lower by 0.1% right now, down 43 points. The NASDAQ 100 index up by 0.2%, and the Dow Jones Industrial Average down 96 for the Dow, a drop of 0.3%. 10-year yield 1.64%. Gold is down at $10 right now. That is a drop of 0.6%. An ounce of the precious metal at $17.28. West Texas Intermediate crude now down 6.1%. WTI 57.77 a barrel. Recapping stocks lower with the S&P down 5. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. So, listen, Tim and I just kicked around some of the virus and vaccine headlines. Pfizer, that human safety testing, they've begun for a new pill to treat the virus that could be used at the first sign of illness. You've got the head of the WHO calling recent increases in deaths and cases, quote, truly worrying trends. The kind of back and forth we see, Tim.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of good news when it comes to treatments and vaccines, but we're seeing bad news when it comes to the numbers still going up, and then countries like Germany putting in stricter lockdown measures in place starting in just a few days.
And Astrazeneca, its own starts and stops, if you will. They said they're going to release up-to-date results from the final stage trial of its vaccine within 48 hours. They're really responding to criticism from a U.S. science agency. So let's get our daily check on all things COVID. Back with us is Dr. Seth Lederman, co-founder, CEO, chairman of the New York-based specialty pharmaceutical and biopharma company, Tonix Pharmaceuticals. He joins us on the phone in New Bedford, Massachusetts. Dr. Lederman, nice to have you back here on Bloomberg. How are you?
Great. Thank you very much for having me on.
So tell us, we want to get into the work that specifically you guys are doing, but tell us about the AstraZeneca vaccine specifically and this Pfizer maybe having a new pill to treat the virus at the first sign of illness. When you hear about that, you think what?
Well, the AstraZeneca story is really unprecedented. It's unprecedented that the Data Safety Monitoring Committee would raise an alarm publicly, and it's just unclear what happened. So I think we all have to wait and watch over the next 48 hours. But I think that the trouble they're having is also a testament to how incredibly well the Pfizer, Moderna, and J&J programs went. If you think about the complexity of these trials, tens of thousands of people, data coming in, the public clamoring for information, and that this is really the first big glitch that we've seen is really remarkable. Although I really don't know what more to say about it, though, except that coming on the heels of the other problems that AstraZeneca has had, it does seem to be eroding confidence in their effort.
Is that erosion of confidence warranted, though? Because we do talk to a lot of people who follow this closely who say that the data still show that this looks like it's going to be and already is an effective vaccine.
I think it's a challenge for them to get everyone's confidence back, but I hope that they will, because certainly on the range of numbers that are being reported by outlets like the Washington Post, between 69 and 79% seem like a vaccine that should be out there and could be helping people.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and you guys are working on your own vaccine as well. Tell us where you are on that process. It's a little bit different than some of the ones that have been put out there already, but get us up to speed on that, if you would.
Thanks. We're working on a vaccine that's based on a live virus vector. We call it TNX 1800. And live virus vaccine vectors induce a stronger immunity and a T cell immunity. So we're hoping that the current vaccines that are EUA authorized will solve the problem. But if they don't, we will be out there in phase 1, we expect this year, and hopefully in efficacy trials next year. The reason that we are still charging forward is it's an unanswered question about whether the 3 EUA vaccines will provide durable immunity. And we think that stimulating T cells strongly has the potential to provide that kind of durable immunity.
We talked about this, Tim and I, with you last time, because this is the distinction. Because I think every time you come on, I'm like, well, why are you guys still pursuing your vaccine? But it is a different, it's longer-term protection from the virus. And remind us, when you talk longer-term, what does that mean specifically? Are we talking years, or tell us? Yeah.
Yes, years or decades. Well, and there are 2 phases of COVID. One is we have to extinguish this pandemic, and it seems like there's great potential for the EUA vaccines to make strides. And so I'm halfway through my Pfizer vaccine protocol. I urge everyone to get vaccinated. I think that these 3 vaccines are great, but I think that we also have to think longer term, that COVID will be endemic. So we have to think about children being born in the future into a world where COVID is endemic. And I believe that COVID vaccination will become part of childhood vaccinations. So, for example, the MMR vaccine, mumps, measles, rubella, is a live virus vaccine, and that provides years and decades of protection.
Hey, Dr. Letterman, to that end, what place do you think treatment has? Because Carol and I just talked about this Pfizer pill that is Pfizer's testing a safety of a new pill to treat the coronavirus that could be used at the first sign of illness. And we have about 40 seconds left.
It's very exciting. I think that now you're seeing that, even with the vaccinations, we're going to be rumbling along, having cases and serious disease, and unfortunately continuing mortality. So I think it's wonderful. It's a new approach. It inhibits a viral enzyme, and I think it could complement what's available with remdesivir from Gilead and the Eli Lilly and Regeneron antibodies. I think that's a very important area for continued development.
All right, hang on for a second. We're going to do a little bit of news, but we'll come back and continue with Dr. Seth Letterman. He's co-founder, chief executive officer, chairman of Tonix Pharmaceuticals. He's really been one of the high flyers in terms of the biotech space, biopharma space in particular this year. But it's a reminder that maybe we're going to need a host of tools to really get our way through.
Yeah, on the other side of the pandemic, experts say it's going to be endemic, and that's what we need to deal with.
All right, you're listening to Bloomberg.
Broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
Yes, indeed. And we're going to get back to our guest, Dr. Seth Lederman, over at Tonix Pharmaceuticals. He founded the company. He's CEO of the company, and they're working on a COVID vaccine.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing his thoughts more about the vaccine, but also about where we are, because we are seeing some concerning numbers throughout the country where cases are continuing to rise.
And I'm watching Europe, and I'm just thinking, God, are we going to go back there? All right, let's get back to your top business stories. Another check on that trading day. Here is Charlie Pellet.
Thank you very much. And here's what's going on lower across the board right now. Equities slipping. Companies that would benefit from an end to lockdowns faring the worst amid concern that rising virus cases and new restrictions in Germany signal the global reopening will be delayed. S&P lower now, little change, down 3 points. Dow Industrials down 108, a drop of 0.3%. Nasdaq is lower by 27. That is a drop of 0.2%, while the Nasdaq 100 index is advancing by 0.4%. 10-year yield 1.64%. Gold is down 0.7%, 17.26 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude now down 6.1%, plunging 372 a barrel. WTI now at 57.85. Pfizer says it has begun human safety testing of a new pill to treat the coronavirus that could be used at the first sign of illness. Pfizer shares, they are trading lower by 1.1%. Astrazeneca says it will release up-to-date results from the final stage trial of its vaccine within 48 hours, responding to criticism from an American science agency. The ADRs of AstraZeneca down now by 2.7%. The head of the World Health Organization is calling recent increases in deaths and cases, quote, truly worrying trends. Well, have people had enough of lockdowns, and does that mean we're doomed for another spike in virus cases similar to what we're seeing in parts of Europe? That question this morning for Dr. Amish Adalja, senior scholar at the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security.
So the goal is, we know people are going to be doing this. Our solution is to keep vaccinating as quickly and as fast as possible so that those individuals are less likely to spread this virus and we're not impacted the way Europe is. I don't think we're going to have a European trajectory based on just our vaccination numbers alone.
The Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health is supported by Michael R. Bloomberg, founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies. Among some of the other vaccine names that we track for you, BioNTech lower now by 5.1%, Moderna shares down now by 4.9%, and Johnson & Johnson moving higher, J&J up now by just about 0.4%. Recapping, 10-year yield 1.64%, S&P lower, down now by 4, a drop of 0.2%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thanks so much. I want to get right back to Dr. Seth Lederman. He's co-founder, chief executive officer, chairman of Tonix Pharmaceuticals, on the phone, still with us from New Bedford, Massachusetts. So, Dr. Lederman, something we're curious about is you guys are working, as you mentioned, specifically on your TNX 1800 vaccine. It's different. It's about T-cell immunity, and you still think that because COVID will be endemic, that we're going to need tools like this going forward. Is there a point, though, that you look at COVID or the virus and you say, wait a minute, you know, we can't keep developing this or it's not going to make sense? Is there a point where you do that? And I bring it up, too, because I think investors are pretty excited about your stock. I mean, it's up more than 100% this year.
Thank you. There may be a point, but we're certainly not there yet. I think, as I mentioned, the EUA vaccines are certainly taking some of the air out of the tire of the virus, but we do need to have durable protection. And one of the things we really don't know is how much immunity is out there. It's easy to measure antibody immunity, but it's hard to measure T-cell immunity. And that's why one of the other programs we have is a skin test to look at T-cell immunity. It's very similar to the PPD test that is used to measure exposure to tuberculosis. But I think that our tool, maybe other tools, they could see how many people have T-cell immunity, could give us a better idea about the amount of immunity in the population and either confidence or less confidence in whether there will be a spike after all this spring break travel.
So where are you in development of that and bringing that to market?
Well, we had a response from the FDA on our development. Expect to file the IND in the second quarter and to be in clinical trials in the third quarter.
So what would that mean as far as when there could potentially be, is this the type of thing that they would do emergency use authorization for, or is this the type of thing that you could bring to market, 100%?
We would hope for emergency use authorization, but I think that will also depend on where the country is in terms of the COVID situation in the fall and spring. But I think that's a decision that FDA will make. We'll certainly ask for it, but they'll have to make that determination.
Do you feel like in general the U.S. is doing a lot better when it comes to getting control of COVID? And I do wonder, though, none of this matter unless everywhere around the world we get it under control, basically?
The U.S. is doing a great job in making vaccine available. It is really remarkable. I think that Operation Warp Speed is almost equivalent to the Manhattan Project and the speed in which these vaccines came out. And we're all lucky, I think, at how effective the 3 EUA vaccines appear to be and the impact they're having. The problem is that it's hard to keep Americans at home. And if you look at the lockdowns in Germany and Ireland, Italy, it makes me almost envious that the government could control people that way, but obviously that's not an option in the United States. So I hope that people would just wait a few more months till we reached higher numbers of vaccinations before they went on vacation travel. But obviously, it's, as they say, a free country and nobody asked me. So I think now a lot of vaccine experts are just cringing, waiting to see what will happen in the coming weeks.
Doctor, you're one of those vaccine experts. What do you think will happen in the coming weeks?
It's hard to tell because we don't know, as I say, I call it the denominator. How many people really have been exposed? How many people had asymptomatic cases, didn't know about it, wrote it off? A lot of people aren't aware that you can have gastrointestinal symptoms only. And since that's not common knowledge, that could result in them being immune and not even thinking in their minds that they had it. The antibodies fade over time. So someone who might have been sick in March or April would be antibody negative now, but still have T cells. So I think it's a big unknown. I'm cautiously optimistic, but what do they say? Watch what I do, not what I say. I'm certainly saying hunker down until a lot more is known.
Really quick question, 15 seconds. If you have COVID, do you automatically develop T cells? Just quickly.
Almost everyone would, unless they had some kind of immunodeficiency.
All right, good to know. Always learn something. Dr. Seth Lederman, thank you so much. Co-founder, Chief Executive Officer, Chairman of Tonix Pharmaceuticals, joining us on the phone from New Bedford, Massachusetts.
Let's get another check of world and national news with Nancy Lyons in D.C. Hey, Nance.
Hey there, Tim. President Biden is wasting no time in urging Congress to take steps to curb the wave of gun violence. He noted yesterday's mass shooting in Boulder, Colorado, where 10 people were killed while shopping in their local supermarket.
While we're still waiting for more information regarding the shooter, his motive, the weapons he used, the guns, the magazines, the weapons, the modifications that apparently have taken place to those weapons that are involved here, I don't need to wait another minute, let alone an hour, to take common sense steps that will save the lives in the future and to urge my colleagues in the House and Senate to act.
Biden spoke from the White House while the Senate Judiciary Committee was holding a hearing that was scheduled before the Colorado attack. Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois agrees with the president. Action cannot wait.
We face a pandemic of coronavirus. We have another epidemic in America called guns.
Durbin says he was working on his opening remarks for the gun control hearing when he heard about the attack. Michael Bloomberg, the founder and majority owner of Bloomberg, the parent of Bloomberg Radio, is a donor to groups that support gun control, including Everytown for gun safety. Postmaster General Louis DeJoy is unveiling a 10-year plan, which is a large rollback of mail services from the U.S. Postal Service.
Our plan delivers a modernized postal service capable of providing world-class service reliability at affordable prices, and erases our $160 billion loss over the next 10 years.
DeJoy calls his plan Delivering for America. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take. Powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Nancy Lyons. This is Bloomberg.
All right, Nance, thank you so much. And this is among our most read stories on the Bloomberg. You and I were getting a little heated over this one.
Taxes.
In the studio, taxes, man, they make us all crazy. Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan, David Solomon of Goldman Sachs, and scores of other New York business leaders warning Governor Andrew Cuomo of the state of New York, that proposed tax hikes would risk the state's economic recovery and worsen the exodus of residents to lower tax locations. Cue the dramatic move.
Look, they added their names to a list of roughly 250 others who argued in a letter sent on Tuesday that higher taxes are not needed because of the federal stimulus programs approved by Congress and higher than expected tax receipts in 2020.
Because everything's solved?
Well, that's the thing. It's a debate about short-term versus long-term.
Right.
And I think one of the conversations happening right now is about inequality. And we saw it come in stark relief during the pandemic and the way the pandemic affected people so differently. Look at the way the wealthy have been able to benefit during the pandemic and actually created wealth during the pandemic.
Right.
We talk about the K-shaped recovery all the time. And with the Biden administration, and you see this in the $1.9 trillion stimulus bill, so much in there to try to attempt to help curb the K-shaped recovery and actually lift all ships.
Right, exactly. Listen, we do talk about the inequities, and there are companies where their stocks are, at a record. They've made tons of money in the last 12 months, and a lot of senior executives or founders of companies are making money, but there's still people at the lower rung that are still struggling just to get along. And listen, all you have to do is look at some of the statistics that are out there where there are people struggling just to put food on their table. We talk about education. Education is not equal around the country, and it's why we're seeing these gaps. It's why we're seeing a lot of conversations about a K-shaped recovery and really a K-shaped economy in terms of people who continue to struggle and others who just continue to succeed.
And the concern I think that some business leaders have is if the taxes become too high in a certain place, they could potentially move somewhere else. And we've seen anecdotal evidence, of course, of companies and people moving to Florida, but to what extent that actually lasts remains to be seen.
We've also heard the stories that people are in New York because they want to live here, whether it's culture, whether it's education, lots of other things. So, yeah. Anyway, most read story on the Bloomberg.
updates, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. We're very close to the lows of the day right now on the S&P 500 index, down 11, a drop now of 0.3%. Equities slipping. Companies that would benefit from an end to lockdowns faring the worst amid concern that rising virus cases and new restrictions in Germany signal the global opening will be delayed. The Dow is down 164, down 0.5%. Nasdaq down 57, a drop of 0.4%. 10-year yield 1.64%. Gold is down $11 the ounce, down 0.7%. 17.27 right now on gold. West Texas Intermediate crude, the selling intensifying, down 6.5% on WTI. That's down $4 a barrel right now, 57.53. Again, recapping, S&P down 11, down 0.4%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Well, thank you very much, Charlie. March is Women's History Month, and Bloomberg Radio is looking back at some of the women who played a vital role in American history. Here with today's installment is Bloomberg's Renita Young.
On this day in women's history in 1917, Virginia Woolf establishes the Hogarth Press with her husband, Leonard Woolf, in the dining room of their home. They published works by key modernist writers. And on the day they established the Hogarth Press, Virginia and Leonard were walking down the street in London and saw the Excelsior Printing Supply Company window. Before that, they'd been turned down at the St. Bride School of Printing. But when they walked into Excelsior, an assistant convinced them that with the help of a 16-page booklet, they'd be able to teach themselves all they needed to start their own printing business. So the Woolfs bought a small hand printing press and launched the business. Virginia would print several of her own books, and she's now considered one of the most innovative writers of the 20th century. Through their nonlinear approaches to writing, Virginia's novels greatly influenced the narrative genre. That's today in women's history. I'm Renita Young, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Renita, thanks so much. Coming up in the new issue of Bloomberg Business Week, it's out later this week, online and on the Bloomberg right now, reporting on how the unemployment system is plagued by $63 billion in fraud and dysfunction. Tim, those are real numbers.
Yeah, they certainly are. And Joel Weber is the editor at Bloomberg Business Week, joining us on the remote from Brooklyn. Olivia Rockman is U.S. economy reporter at Bloomberg News, joining us on the phone from New York City. Carol mentioned it, Joel. Billions of dollars lost to fraud.
Yeah, it's a big number, and it's all the more concerning because it's happening in a space that, you know, we have millions of people who remain vulnerable, and when you see this much money seeping out the sides and the dysfunction that accompanies it, it's cause for concern. So Olivia, can you help dive into this story and tell us what you were able to find out through your reporting?
Yeah, and just a note on that 63 billion number, that's actually a backward-looking figure. And so, you know, now that Biden has reinstated unemployment through September, we're just going to see that figure continue to grow as more people apply and as the system continues to be available.
So how come it's so bad?
One of the reasons is that the unemployment application systems that are administered by states are just websites. And so anyone in any country can simply apply online. Another issue is that the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program, which was launched as part of the CARES Act for gig workers and self-employed workers, doesn't require an employer verification. And so a lot of people, either in foreign countries or in the United States, have been applying with the hopes that they get through without that extra step.
So what do we know about where this money has gone, and is there any chance that the U.S. government can get it back? Because this has real consequences, because this is meant for the American people who need the money.
Right. We spoke with some security experts who have been working with states, and they mentioned that there are major crime rings coming out of Nigeria. Some federal inmates in United States prisons have been able to apply and get money, as well as people in countries including Japan, countries in Africa, countries in Europe, et cetera. So it really is coming from all over the place. In terms of getting the money back, it seems to us right now that the real effort is in prosecuting the criminals that they found, but not as much about getting the money back currently.
So many of the problems here also arise from the federal kind of state interactions. And so what are state unemployment offices doing to combat this threat?
Right now, states don't have a ton of resources at hand, other than that some have hired security firms to do additional verification to try to keep fraudsters out of their systems. But that said, what happens when you have these extra processes is that Americans who do qualify for benefits and actually need them often get lost in that system. So it's sort of a lose-lose situation right now.
So, Olivia, you got to talk about some of the crazy stuff you came across in doing this story. People wearing masks to kind of get benefits. You talk about, I guess there was a case you talk about in Nevada last year where there was something like 1,700 claims to a single home address. Tell us about some of the crazy stuff you came across.
Yeah, so on that point about the mask, some people that have applied for benefits and then have to go through an online video process to verify their identity, who are fraudsters, have been 3D printing fake faces that they wear on these video calls to appear to be the person that they're impersonating, which was shocking to me.
What about the people doing this from prison?
So prisoners are actually submitting their identification cards, their inmate identification cards, as their driver's licenses. And some of them were able to get through just using that. That's the extent of it.
But they wouldn't qualify, is what you're saying.
They shouldn't qualify.
Right.
But, they're getting through the system. Yeah.
So, Olivia, when you step back from all this, I mean, it feels rather existential. Like we have millions of people who need this money, even if it's a sieve. At least some of it's going there. Like, how are we going to look back on all of this? Do you think?
So one thing in terms of good news is that Biden's latest stimulus bill, the American Rescue Act, allocated about $2 billion to states, divided among states, to address in part fraud. And so that may help in the coming months sort of alleviate some of the stress that the states are facing. But overall, this really becomes a taxpayer issue, and, Americans are going to have to foot this bill if the government can't recoup the dollars.
Well, and I think the other thing is, too, what's interesting about this story, what's important about this story is we have talked about it so much leading up to the massive stimulus package being passed and talking about the importance of this money getting into the economy, consumers having access to it, Olivia, to spend and to help out with the recovery. I mean, there's lots of moving parts to this, but that's what we're kind of counting on to get this economy continuing to be on track.
Right. We talk so much about retail sales and consumer spending driving the recovery, but when we have examples like in this story, a couple we spoke to who couldn't get their unemployment insurance because they were flagged for fraud, even though they weren't criminals, that just holds back, the entire economy as well.
Hey, you mentioned that this is a backward-looking number. What do we have to keep an eye on with the pushing through of the $1.9 trillion stimulus plan to see if any of the changes that have been made to better secure these funds are actually working?
Right. So there's a government body called the Office of the Inspector General, and they've been putting out reports every couple of months on the estimated amount of money that they think is fraudulent. And so, as we continue to see this money go out, we will, on our side, keep looking at these reports and seeing if they've kind of noticed the percentage of total dollars being paid to fraud go down or change at all.
Right. I mean, listen, it's a massive system already kind of, strained. And then if you've got to go after fraud claims or fraudulent claims, and a lot of them, I can just imagine how difficult it is for the system to get on top of it. Thank you so much. Olivia Rockman, that's our story. U.S. economy reporter at Bloomberg News on the phone in New York. Joe Weber, editor of Bloomberg Business Week on the remote access from Brooklyn.
$63 billion.
That's a lot of money. It's real money. That's a lot.
Mind-blowing.
Yeah, it is. And it's a shame because it's money that could be put to better use elsewhere. So check that out. It's in the upcoming issue of Bloomberg Business Week and at Bloomberg.com. For those of you listening in New York, D.C., and San Francisco, watching on YouTube, Bloomberg Business Week continues. If you're listening on Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, Bay State Business, that's next.
news, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. We move into the final hour of trading on this Tuesday, March 23rd. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all in retreat. Lows of the day right now with the S&P down 20, a drop of 0.5%. The Dow is now down 224 points, lower by 0.7%. And NASDAQ is down 108, a drop of 0.8%. Equities are slipping with companies that would benefit from an end to lockdowns faring the worst amid concern that rising virus cases and new restrictions in Germany signal the global opening will be delayed. 10-year yield, 1.63%. Gold is down $12 the ounce, down 0.7%. West Texas Intermediate crude plunging 6.5%, now at $57.57 a barrel. Fed Chair Jay Powell says prices will rise this year as the pandemic recedes and Americans are able to go out and spend, but he is playing down the risk that this will spur unwanted inflation.
Recovery has progressed more quickly than generally expected and looks to be strengthening. This is due in significant part to the unprecedented fiscal and monetary policy actions I mentioned, which provided essential support to households, businesses, and communities.
And Powell testified before a congressional committee along with Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen as part of oversight of the government's response to the pandemic.
With the passage of the rescue plan, I'm confident that people will reach the other side of this pandemic with the foundations of their lives intact. And I believe they'll be met there by a growing economy. In fact, I think we may see a return to full employment next year. Of course, the speed and strength of our recovery depends in part on how we implement the legislation.
The Commerce Department says new home sales dropped 18.2% in February, largest decline in almost 8 years. Among some of the home builders, Lennar down 1.7%, Toll down 2.1%, D.R. Horton down 0.9%, KB Home down 3.5%. Charlie Pellet, Bloomberg Radio.
This is Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Bloomberg Quick Takes Tim Stenovic on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, so much to talk about with our next guest, so let's get right to it. And great to have back with us Joseph Stiglitz. He is co-chair of the Commission on Global Economic Transformation at the Institute for New Economic Thinking, Nobel laureate economist, Columbia University professor of economics, author of numerous books, including People, Power, and Profits. Professor Stiglitz is joining us on the phone in New York City. Professor Stiglitz, great to have you back here on Bloomberg Radio. Let's talk about, first of all, this report that you and the team at the Institute for New Economic Thinking have put out. And this is about dealing with the pandemic and the importance of it being a global effort and one that takes care of the developing world. What are you seeing currently, though, that warranted you and your team coming out and putting out this missive?
Well, the key point is that the developing countries, particularly in emerging markets, are not on track to have the kind of light at the end of the tunnel that we're beginning to see in the United States in two distinct areas. We're getting vaccinated. President Biden talked about July 4th being our day of independence from the COVID-19. And there are many, many countries, as we document around the world, that have not had a single vaccine. They just can't get access. They can't afford it. And one of the points we make is that supply constraint is in part artificial. The second thing is the United States has spent approximately $17,000 per capita, 24% of GDP, on the economic recovery, the Rescue Act, combined with the CARES Act that was passed last spring and the December bill. The developing countries are spending a fraction of that because they just don't have the money. They're spending on average somewhere between $2 and $17 per capita. Compare that with $17,000 in the United States.
Professor, let's start with the recovery when it comes to vaccinations around the world, and then get to economics in just a few minutes here. But obviously the two are intertwined. I got to ask, when it comes to this virus, the way that we're looking at it, I think so many Americans look at it from a perspective of where they live, right? In their neighborhood, who they're around, in their city, and those are the statistics that they're looking at, how easy it is to get them a vaccine. Make the case as to why we should take a global approach and why we're not out of the pandemic until the world is vaccinated.
The real reason, one of the real reasons we ought to be concerned is this virus seems particularly successful in mutating. And as long as it's mutating, as long as it's flourishing in any part of the world, and the longer it flourishes, the more mutations, some of those mutations are going to come back and, to put it, bite us. We don't know when, and we don't know how bad it will be. Will those mutations be more contagious, more deadly? Will they? We just don't know. So we are at a very big risk of letting this virus just basically flourish in some parts of the world.
And listen, not apples to apples, but Professor Stiglitz, coming off of the financial crisis, I think we learned hopefully a lot in terms of we thought this was going to be developed, the developed world thing. We saw it really spread around the globe in terms of the crisis. Is there something that we can or should have learned from that crisis that we can carry over to this crisis in terms of its impact globally?
Well, you remember in that particular crisis, the G20 was founded on the basis of the recognition that we needed to have a global economic recovery. Gordon Brown, who was the Prime Minister of the UK at the time, was particularly forceful. He pointed out that if one country is doing well, it helps its neighbors, and if it's doing poorly, it hurts its neighbors. We've lost an enormous number of jobs in the export area because of the global slowdown. So it's just in our own self-interest that there be a strong global recovery. And certain sectors, of course, if we don't have a strong recovery, they just won't be able to get back on their feet. So that's, on the economic side, why it's so important for this to be a global recovery. Back in 2008-9, China played a very big role in that global economic recovery. It grew really very, very strongly. This year, China is the only major country growing, but it's only growing about 3%. Next year, it's expected to be somewhat stronger, but with Europe as weak as it is, a decline of something like twice that of the United States, 8%, and having a hard time getting the vaccines and getting the disease under control. It's really important that developing countries and emerging markets have as strong a recovery as we can engineer.
We have about a minute and a half, and then we'll take a break and come back and talk some more. But what do we need to put in place in order for this to happen at this point? Is this just a case of developed government saying, listen, we've got to spend to help these developing economies get the vaccine there? Is it that the first big step that we have to do? And just get about a minute, and then we'll come back and talk more.
Sure. Health is obviously the first order of business. Getting vaccines, therapeutics, protective gear to the developing countries and emerging markets is absolutely necessary. There's a policy framework, though, that can help facilitate that, and that's a temporary suspension on some of the intellectual property rights that pertain particularly to COVID-19.
Meaning allow companies to reproduce vaccine and other technology so it can quickly be distributed?
Absolutely. And, they can pay a license fee. It's not like you're not compensating those who did the basic research. But remember, much of that research was funded by the public in the United States and in Europe. So, the returns that the vaccine companies have already obtained or scheduled to obtain this year are look like they will be an enormous return on their private investments.
Right.
So
And a recurring investment, potentially. We did a great cover story on Pfizer specifically. Professor Stiglitz, sit tight for a second. We're going to come back to you and continue the conversation. In the meantime, let's get to world and national news and Nancy Lyons in D.C. Hey, Nance.
Hey, Carol. Boulder police say 21-year-old Ahmad Alissa is the suspect in yesterday's attack at a Boulder supermarket. He's facing 10 counts of murder. Colorado Congressman Joe Neguse is outraged by what happened.
This cannot be our new normal. We should be able to feel safe in our grocery stores, in our schools, in our movie theaters, and in our communities. We need to see a change because we have lost far too many lives.
Neguse says the community is strong and will get through this. The Senate Judiciary Committee has been discussing gun control at a hearing today that was scheduled prior to the Boulder attack. Senator Dick Durbin says effective legislation to curb gun violence is long overdue.
Prayer leaders have their important place in this, but we are Senate leaders. What are we doing other than reflecting and praying?
Durbin's Republican colleague, Senator Ted Cruz, is pushing back on imposing new restrictions on guns.
Democrats propose taking away guns from law-abiding citizens because that's their political objective. But what they propose, not only does it not reduce crime, it makes it worse.
Cruz says disarming law-abiding citizens makes them more likely to be victims. President Biden says everyone should be behind tougher gun controls.
This is not and should not be a partisan issue. This is an American issue. It will save lives, American lives. And we have to act.
Biden spoke from the White House. Michael Bloomberg, the founder and majority owner of Bloomberg LP, the parent of Bloomberg Radio, is a donor to groups that support gun control, including Everytown for Gun Safety. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Nancy Lyons. Now let's go to Charlie Pellet for a business flash.
Hi, thank you very much, Nancy Lyons. And here's what's going on. We've got 49 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell, making a run right now. In fact, we are at the lows of the day once again on the S&P 500 index. Right to the numbers. We'll give you the why in a moment. S&P down 22. That is a drop of 0.6%. We've got the Dow Jones Industrial Average down 247, lower by 0.8%. And NASDAQ is down 106 points. That is a drop of about 0.8%. NASDAQ 100 index also moving lower, down now by 0.2%. Russell 2000 hard hit, down 3.2%. Dow Transport's now lower by 1.9%. 10-year yield 1.6%. Gold is down 70 cents the ounce at $17.26. West Texas Intermediate crude plunging 6.3%, 57.67 a barrel on WTI. Equities are falling. Companies that would benefit from an end to lockdowns faring the worst amid concern that rising virus cases and new restrictions in Germany signal the global reopening will be delayed. So again, recapping equities lower across the board. S&P at the low of the day, down now by 0.6%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Want to get right back to Joe Stiglitz, Professor Stiglitz, co-chair of the Commission on Global Economic Transformation at the Institute for New Economic Thinking, of course, Nobel laureate, Columbia University professor of economics, still with us on the phone in New York City. So, Professor Stiglitz, let's talk about your plan and the Institute for New Economic Thinking, this three-pronged strategy of helping the world in terms of getting beyond COVID and its impact. We've already talked about vaccines, that vaccines need to be made available for the developing world. You also, though, the other two prongs, economic recovery policies and debt management. Talk briefly about those.
Well, I mentioned earlier that the fiscal space in the United States is just so much larger than these developing countries and emerging markets. They just don't have much they can do. So one proposal that is really important is the issuance of SDR, special drawing rights, a kind of global money that the IMF is authorized to issue. Under the Trump administration, they vetoed this. Wouldn't cost American taxpayers anything. The amounts that the head of the IMF called for is roughly $650 billion US dollars, 500 billion SDRs. It would be of enormous help to the developing countries and emerging markets, particularly if the advanced countries that don't need these additional reserves could recycle them either through donating or lending them to the developing countries and emerging markets. So that's one very important instrument that could give them more fiscal space. The second one is a lot of the developing countries and emerging markets are spending a lot of money servicing debt. They had too much debt going into the pandemic, but now with their global growth plummeting, their country's economy going south, they simply don't have the wherewithal to continue to service that debt and provide education, health, so forth for their citizens. So in the beginning of the crisis, the G20 called for what was called a DEX Day, but that was at an era hard to remember now, back in the spring, when a lot of people thought it would be just a few weeks. We'd be back running by the end of June. Well, a year, and the devastation in a number of countries, not all, but a number of countries has been very great. So what is needed now is not just a DEX Day, but a debt restructuring.
But you know that there's going to be the pushback. I'm playing devil's advocate of like, why should we give these guys a hand? I mean, this is about, being fiscally responsible and whether or not then the money gets used for the right thing. You know the pushback arguments about this, and it's not necessarily my point of view, but just saying...
Sure, no, I know them a lot.
I know you do. I know you do. So, because especially as people are saying, listen, the economies are starting to get back on track, and they all won't recover altogether, but things are getting better. So why do this now?
So first, I begin by pointing out that every bad loan has both a creditor and a borrower. And the creditor is supposed to be the person who is the specialist in risk analysis. The borrowing countries just know that they need money or would like money, but the creditor is the one who is supposed to be able to say, if you borrow this and something bad happens, you're going to be in a bad position to repay. So I blame the creditors. I put them at the center of the problem. They pushed money on these countries that was risky. And, there's risk, always going to be risk, but too many countries were at the point where anything that went wrong would have pushed them over the cliff. And clearly, COVID-19 is something that no one could have anticipated. So it's not, it's not a matter at this point of blaming. The question is, how much suffering do you want to occur in the developing countries and emerging markets?
Right.
And it's a lose-lose situation. If they impose austerity, as has happened in the past, if there's the usual stance of too little debt restructuring done too late, what happens is these countries' growth gets so inhibited that, in fact, they aren't able to pay as much as they would be able to pay if you gave them more space right now.
Well, it's no different than the conversations. Well, it is different, but I mean, what we've been talking about, massive stimulus here in the United States, that we don't want the economy to fall into such a slump that it's going to be much tougher to get out of, Tim.
Yeah, the $1.9 trillion stimulus package, relief package, if you want to call it that, Professor Stiglitz, does that go far enough? What else do you want to see from the U.S. government?
Well, was to get us out of the hole. But, things weren't great in January 2019, or January 2020 when the pandemic struck. We had huge infrastructure gaps. We had not addressed the problem of climate change. We have huge problems of inequality, which have been both exposed and exaggerated by the pandemic. So once we are well on the road to recovery, it will be absolutely imperative that we start addressing those long-standing needs if we're going to get a really robust and resilient economy. So to me, this was just the first step, and there needs to be a longer run program put in place.
What's a more effective policy in your view, Professor Stiglitz? Is it massive spending programs by the federal government, or is it increasing taxes and tax policy, especially as the president and his team are now talking about taxing the wealthier to provide new revenue into the system?
Well, I think that we will be approaching closer to full employment. There still will be particular groups that are not fully integrated into the labor market, and one of the reasons I'm a big fan of having tight labor markets is the only time when you do that. But as we approach full employment, we have to have the resources to make those investments I talked about in infrastructure, education, R&D, address the problems of inequality. You're going to need more revenue. And the United States, it has a distorted tax system. We are one of the few countries where those at the very top pay a lower overall tax rate than those down below.
Can I tell you one of the most read stories on the Bloomberg, Professor Stiglitz, is Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan, David Solomon of Goldman, lots of other New York business leaders warning Governor Cuomo of New York that proposed tax hikes would risk the state's economic recovery and worsen the exodus of residents to lower tax locations. If you were in a room with Jamie Dimon and David Solomon, what would you say to them?
That they're wrong.
But why? Why are they wrong?
Yeah, well, there are two aspects of this. What we were talking about a minute ago was raising taxes at the national level. And that's somewhat different than at the state level. There aren't many Americans who are so disloyal that you raise their taxes and they say, I'm going to go live in Singapore. There are a few, but those are exceptions. And we actually have an exit tax to discourage that kind of behavior. But I think most Americans, value living in the United States, and so they're not going to just leave. And that's why I'm not worried about raising the wealth tax or getting rid of some of the distortions, the lower tax on capital gains, the lower tax on dividends. Why should a worker pay a higher tax rate than somebody who's clipping coupons? At the state level, we've done some research looking at those effects. What happens if an individual state raises their tax? And obviously, at some level, people will move. I'm not going to deny that. But the evidence is that the migration is much less than those who are raising those warnings say. So, one has to be mindful that people have a choice of where to live. And it's particularly true obviously in the New York area, where you could live in New Jersey, Connecticut, or New York State. And it's not a big move.
New Jersey taxes are high too. I live there. They're not. I'm just gonna say.
Yeah.
Listen, can we talk outlook with you, because we'd be remiss if we didn't, Tim and I, ask you about, when you look at the economic outlook. I mean, everybody's talking about a second half recovery. How does it look to you? What's the economic story maybe later this year? How do you see it?
I am very optimistic. I think as a result of that $1.9 trillion, we're going to have a strong recovery. And I think most people see that. The Fed has talked about 6.5%. I gather Goldman Sachs has talked about 8% growth rates. There's so much uncertainty. Remember, we were talking before about the global recovery is very tenuous because Europe has had a slow vaccine rollout. The emerging markets, developing countries, don't have the resources to have the kind of stimulus that we've had in the United States. So all those obviously are going to affect the overall strength of the U.S. recovery. But basically, I'm very optimistic. And if we can get some of the second round, those investments in infrastructure that I talked about before, climate change, then I think we're really set for a good.
It's going to be a tough sell in Washington, Professor. What is the message that you would have to Republicans or to Democrats to convince them to get at the table together and get something through? And we only have about a minute left.
Well, I think, remember, what we were talking about now is investment. And even if we have to borrow, the fact is that anybody ought to be looking at this from the national balance sheet, and these investments strengthen our national balance sheet. But in fact, there are so many gaps in our tax structure that we could have a more efficient and fairer tax structure that a mixture of borrowing and raising taxes, improving environmental taxes, would actually so benefit our economy and our growth and our standards of living.
Yeah. Just looking for also more equitable when it comes to all of these. Professor Stiglitz, thank you so much. Joseph Stiglitz, he's Nobel laureate economist, of course, professor of economics at Columbia University, and of course, he is on the Commission on Global Economic Transformation at the Institute for New Economic Thinking. You are listening to Bloomberg Radio.
Broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Business Week.
All right, it's that time of the day.
It is the chart of the day and the song of the day. What do you think it's going to be?
I have no idea.
The song.
I have no idea.
Okay.
I have no idea.
Well, you and me both.
Yeah, okay. All right, let's get to Charlie Pellet with a check on that trading day. Hey, Charlie.
Well, hello there. Do they have a song for worst level of the day? Because that's what we're singing right now. We've got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all declining right to the numbers. Dow down 330, a drop now of 1%. S&P is slumping 33. That is a drop of about 0.9%. And we have got the NASDAQ Composite Index down now by 1.1%. For the NASDAQ Composite Index down 156 points. NASDAQ 100 Index lower now by 0.5%. A lot of damage to the Russell 2000, down now by 3.9%. Small caps are tumbling. 10-year yield 1.62%. Equities are falling, with companies that would benefit from an end to lockdowns faring the worst amid concern that rising virus cases and new restrictions in Germany signal the global reopening will be delayed. The head of the World Health Organization is calling recent increases in deaths and cases, quote, truly worrying trends. Indeed, beautiful weather last weekend here in the northeastern part of America. Parties in Miami Beach, New Jersey pausing further rollbacks on restrictions. Have people had enough of lockdowns, and does that mean we are doomed for another spike in cases? Dr. Amish Adalja, senior scholar at the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security, and he was interviewed this morning on Bloomberg Television and Radio.
I think the United States is going to have some uptick in cases. Whether or not it looks like Europe, I think it remains to be seen. I think what's better in the United States than in Europe is we have a much more robust vaccination program. And the goal is to get as many people vaccinated as possible, and we're doing that, getting 2-3 million people vaccinated. So I do think we're probably able to stay ahead of the worst consequences of people's lack of social distancing.
The Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health is supported by Michael R. Bloomberg, founder of Bloomberg LP and Bloomberg Philanthropies. Among some of the vaccine names, we've got Pfizer down 1.8%, BioNTech down 5.7%, AstraZeneca down 3.5%, the ADRs of AstraZeneca, Moderna's down now by 5.7%, Johnson & Johnson tumbling by 0.4%. Reopening stocks, specifically airlines, hit very hard today. A lot of turbulence in that group, with UAL down 7%. American Airlines Group down 7.2%, Delta dropping 5.1%, Southwest down 3.6%, and JetBlue lower by 0.9%. Recapping a sell-off on Wall Street, S&P lows of the day lower now by 34, down 0.9%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you, Charlie Pellet. This is Bloomberg.
Like a great place. That's you're right. That's pretty cool.
Sam Moore has been there. I mean, I got my picture taken with him.
Very cool.
That was great.
Yeah. Listen, what a great, oh man, when it comes to music and just iconic. Good stuff. We could have left that playing though, right?
Yeah, you sure could have. But in any case,
let's do your chart.
It's a bit of a play on words. In fact, today it's all about a play on words in a sense. You know, here we are, 1 year into a bull market off the March lows of last year. And, I decided to go back and take a look at how the past 12 months have been for the S&P 500's 11 main industry groups and put it into a historical context. And when you run the numbers, and bear in mind these industry gauges go back to 1990, so that's what you're looking at in terms of 12-month comparisons, there's sort of a calm theme to the records that are being set. And I say that because you're talking about commodity-related stocks
and communications, both starting with the letters COMM, but that's neither here nor there. What does emerge, though, is you see energy and materials, right? I mean, you're talking about two groups that fit under the broader category of commodities. And what we've seen from them in the last 12 months is unprecedented in those categories, that they've been up more than they have ever been before this year, you know, looking at these indexes. I mean, you're talking about gains on the order of 90%, all right, not shabby. And then, you know, communications, you think about it, you know, back in the day it was just phone companies. Then in 2018, they had in, you know, media companies like Walt Disney, and then the, you know, social media companies and other internet companies like, you know, Facebook and Twitter and Google's owner Alphabet. And so you've seen a gain in that group in the last 12 months, although it hasn't been at the forefront overall in the 11 main groups, but again, up more than ever before. And that's really where the strength has been. You know, you think about the commodity-related shares, they've led the rally. And, you know, how many times do we talk about big tech, and certainly communication services, that category within the S&P 500, is affected by what's happening with big tech.
So does it make sense to you, the connection between these two? Because I don't think in normal...
Not at all.
Yeah, okay.
But it's just the way
It's not just you, Carol. It's not just you.
It's not just
3
and
out
me.
of the 11 groups, and they happen to be, you know, there's a coincidence of their names. In any case, if you want to see what I'm talking about, folks, and you haven't had a chance to take a look at the chart, send me an email. I'll get it to you along with the explanation that goes with it and everything I do going forward. The email address is dwilson@bloomberg.net. That's dwilson@bloomberg.net.
Hey, Dave, here we are a year away from that bottom in the most recent, you know, bull and bear market. What were you doing a year ago? What do you remember?
Oh, I went back and I checked my calendar. A year ago today, see, the first week, you know, after the coronavirus situation reared its head, I actually went into the office. So it was a year ago today that I started working from home.
Yeah, I mean, I remember just being glued to the charts at this time last year, wondering what was happening. I mean, markets were in free fall.
Yeah.
And I actually made a couple of trades personally to lock in some losses on mutual funds so I could report them at tax time the next year.
Ah, a little
interesting.
strategy.
Wow.
I was planning way ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you know, I'd had issues in the past. And it's like, okay, let's deal with it this time. Take advantage of it, shift some things around, and maybe it'll be better. And indeed, it was.
I don't know why I have an accountant if I can just talk to Dave.
That's so true. You don't need it. Just talk to Dave. Good stuff, Dave. Thank you so much. Dave Wilson, he's going to be back a little bit later on with his stock of the day. Yeah, remember it. Just like everything was shutting down, right?
Yeah, and the financial markets were in free fall.
Yeah.
It was a wild feeling.
Well, we never had seen just kind of our world as we know it, just shutting down everywhere. All right, let's go back to world and national news. Over to Nancy Lyons in our 99.1 newsroom in the nation's capital. Hi, Nance.
Hey, Carol. Boulder County District Attorney Michael Dougherty says police and prosecutors are hard at work putting a case together against the man accused of killing 10 people at a King Superstore yesterday.
I promise you that all of us here will work tirelessly to support you and help you through this process, and also to make sure that the killer is held absolutely and fully accountable for what he did to them, to all the loved ones and friends of the victims, and to the Boulder community.
Dougherty says it is early in the investigation. A motive is still not known. The suspect has been identified as 21-year-old Ahmad Alissa. He's facing 10 charges of murder. President Biden is calling for more gun controls after the Boulder attack, the second mass shooting in a week.
We can save lives, increasing the background checks so that they're supposed to occur, and eliminating assault weapons.
Biden is vowing to use all the resources at his disposal to keep the American people safe. Michael Bloomberg, the founder and majority owner of Bloomberg LP, the parent of Bloomberg Radio, is a donor to groups that support gun control, including Everytown for Gun Safety. The jury has been seated for former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin's trial in the death of George Floyd. Those picked include a chemist, a nurse, a social worker, and a grandmother. It's a racially mixed group with 6 people who identify as black or multiracial. Opening arguments will begin on Monday. A Banksy painting honoring Britain's health workers in the pandemic is sold for a record $23.2 million. That's according to Christie's. Proceeds from the sale will be used to fund health organizations and charities across the UK. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts.
All right, Nance, thank you so much. This story, I think, still among the most read as well, and it definitely came up on our radar early this morning, has to do with the Citigroup CEO.
How would you like, Carol, to have Zoom-free Fridays?
I'm in.
You're in?
I'm in.
Zoom-free, internal meeting-free, and getting encouraged to go on vacation.
I'm in.
All right, you're in. Well, that's what Citi's CEO, Jane Fraser, is doing in an internal memo that was obtained by Bloomberg. She talked about having Zoom-free Fridays, this in an effort to help end the pandemic-related malaise that's happening at the workplace.
I have to tell you, I had a conversation earlier today. You're gonna hear it tomorrow. It's part of a Bloomberg Live event that's looking at mental health and the economy, and I had it with the CEO of Accenture North America, and we talked about these issues in terms of how do you limit so that employees don't feel so stressed out and taxed? They've been worrying about their physical health, but their mental health has been a big issue too. And some of this, in terms of Fridays, comes up in our conversation.
The two of those things are inextricably bound, right?
Yeah.
Physical health, mental health. And then just put on top of that the idea of rolling out of bed and needing to be on your computer right there, right? There's no separation between work and not working, working at home. You lose that commute time. And what we found early on in the pandemic is that commute time was being taken up by work time. So employees were using the time that they used to commute to log on early and stay logged on late.
Right.
And it's not been necessarily a great thing for employee satisfaction and employee health.
No, and listen, there is a point where if you're working from home, you're like, well, wait, I can't really say no. If somebody messages me at 8 o'clock at night or 9 o'clock at night and they need something or whatever, you do feel like you're constantly on call. And the thing is, a lot of CEOs that I've been talking to say it's going to be hybrid going back. There's going to be options. And so we do need to figure out what are the boundaries and how to make this productive and manageable for employees.
I think it's hitting everybody, and it's hitting everybody differently.
Mm-hmm.
And I think putting in place restrictions like this can do a lot. I wonder to what extent people will keep to it, though.
Yep. A no
Easy
Zoom,
to say, right?
A no Zoom. Well, that's it. I wonder as we all get back into the swing of things and all of us workaholics, whether or not this goes to the wayside. All right, you're listening to Bloomberg Business Week, and this is Bloomberg.
news, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Oil plunges, a major sell-off on Wall Street from Bloomberg World Headquarters. I'm Charlie Pellet. Let's get all the latest now. 13 minutes to go ahead of the closing bell as we head right over to the First Word breaking news desk. Lots going on. Here he is with today's afternoon call, Bill Maloney.
And good afternoon, Charlie. That's right. U.S. stocks under pressure amid reopening worries and a plunge in small caps. Dow's currently down 312 points. S&P's dropped 29. NASDAQ is lower by 135. And those small caps, they're down 4%. The U.S. 10 yield at 1.62. Gold is down 11. And transports dropped 311 points, led by the airlines. Among the main 11 S&P sectors, only utilities and consumer staples were in the green. Materials and industrials were under pressure. And leaders to the upside in the Dow, defensive names Procter & Gamble and Walmart, while Dow Inc. and Boeing led to the downside. In other news, Powell said some asset prices are a bit high and the banks are well capitalized. And Viacom fell 10% after announcing a $3 billion share offering. Wrapping things up, GameStop and Adobe report after the bell. Live from the First Breaking News Desk, I'm Bill Maloney. Charlie?
Okay, I thank you very much, Bill Maloney. And to hear live breaking news over you, Bloomberg Times Squawk, SQUAWK on your terminal. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you, Charlie Pellet. It's been a little over a year since the COVID-19 pandemic disrupted our lives. Every day at this time, we're taking a look at different industries or ways of life that underwent monumental change in the past 12 months. Here with today's installment of A Year Like No Other is Bloomberg's Denise Pellegrini.
A year ago, at about this time, one Bitcoin was worth just about $5,000. But lately, it's been closer to $60,000, and it could go even higher, according to investors like billionaire Mike Novogratz of Galaxy Digital.
The next big leg is up to 100,000, and that wouldn't surprise me at all if we crack 100 by the end of the year.
Similar picture for other cryptocurrencies, as lockdowns and work-from-home arrangements heighten our appreciation of many things virtual.
We've all been spending the last year plus now, and we're looking towards more time spent in this virtual parallel universe.
You can now even buy virtual art at Christie's with cryptocurrency, according to Noah Davis, contemporary art specialist at the auction house.
It's just a brand new first for us.
And not only can you pay for more things in cryptos, large companies, including Tesla, are now investing in them, even as regulators eye more controls on Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. As we move beyond this year like no other. Denise Pellegrini, Bloomberg Radio.
I'm driving in my car. I turn on the radio.
How about you let me drive?
Oh, no. Who's gonna drive you home?
Honey, please, I'll do the driving.
Drive on.
Excuse me, I want to drive.
Just drive, baby.
It's the question that drives us.
This is the Drive to the Close.
That funky music will drive us till the dawn.
On Bloomberg Radio.
It is time for the Drive to the Close. Just about 10 minutes left in today's trading session. Back with us is Kathy Boyle. She's president and founder of Chapin Hill Advisors, and she is once again on the phone in Pound Ridge, New York. Hi, Kathy. How are you?
Hey, Carol. I'm just great. Delighted to be here.
Carol and Tim, I know, my hosts move around. This one's a keeper. We're going to keep them.
Oh, thanks. For now.
For now. Listen, this market environment, I'm not quite sure. It feels like things are getting better. There's certainly optimism about the second half. How do you see it?
So I think that we are in, look, the market could continue this craziness. We just had the best 12 months in the S&P since 1936. Really hard to believe.
Right.
But we've got, I think people are underestimating the interest rate effect. We certainly see it today with small caps, right, down almost 4%. And look at the tech stocks, the combination there, and there's a lot of concentration. I think people don't often look at things like the overweight in their various positions. So they have money managers and mutual funds. and ETFs, and very often they think they're diversified, but they have many of the same things. And then we do have this giant rebalancing going on here. It's supposed to be $316 billion worth of money that should flow out of other investments into bonds to rebalance the portfolios.
So where are you seeing opportunity right now?
Well, I think there's certainly opportunity in alternative things. I mean, gold and silver have both pulled back, and I think those are excellent inflation hedges, not for your entire, just for a hedge for a piece of your portfolio. I think you want to look at some long-short portfolios, active managers like an AQR. Those types of managers can hedge the bets. I think you want to be very, very careful about plain vanilla ETFs because people underestimate, again, the risk. There's no downside protection. You want to look back and look for managers that actually did well in more turbulent times because I think the easy money has been made. And I think this interest rate risk is much greater than many people recognize.
Kathy, go back to the rebalancing that you were talking about. You're talking about what? Just the equity side of portfolios getting out of balance with the fixed income side, and that's why we'll see moves, or explain it a little bit more.
Yeah, so the numbers are pretty dramatic. Every quarter, the 60-40 portfolios, so 60% equities, 40% bonds or fixed income, they need to rebalance to keep that in line with their investment policy statement. So you'll see pension funds, which are a huge amount of money, any balanced mutual fund, and then certain banks may have that kind of limitation, insurance companies, and also the Bank of Japan's pension fund is a big one as well. So you combine those big numbers, and you're looking at, $316 billion has to go into fixed income. So where does it come out of? It comes out of either your alternatives or your equities. A lot of it will be in traditional equities. So as the flow comes out short term, that can be a catalyst for a downturn in the market.
Can be, but not a guarantee, correct?
Correct. If everything was easy and it repeated just like it did before, we'd have a much easier time managing our portfolios.
Okay, so you mentioned gold and silver, but on the equity side, is there any opportunity there?
So I think you're certainly seeing a huge rotation from growth to value. So value has underperformed for a very long period of time. So I think there is relative safety. Remember, when the markets go down, it takes all sectors down, but value will tend to hold up better. So you want to look there, some of the healthcare stocks, pharmaceutical stocks, certainly they're getting a boost from the vaccine and, and some other developments. But I think, even the Russell 1000 value is up, I think it's up around 11% year to date, while the Russell large cap growth is slightly negative. So that's a complete switch.
Yeah, going back to the 60-40 portfolio, the conversations that have happened over the last few months about, kind of the death or of the 60-40 portfolio because of performance. How do you think, though, that could ultimately impact how people invest, especially among those institutional portfolios?
Yeah, so I think that's a good point, Carol. And, a lot of the smaller pensions, and we've seen some of the foundations in the colleges, universities, some of those were the first ones to actually consider an alternative sleeve. The committees on the pension funds are often made up of, very big CEOs, CFOs, and they tend to be very, very afraid of being wrong. So they tend to move slower towards changing their allocation, where the smaller are little more nimble and more reflective. So I think it depends on the alternative sleeve and whether or not, like real estate right now is a dangerous game for most people to play. So that's a typical alternative sleeve. So you might see more into the commodity market, which has been very beaten up, or you may see more into the gold and silver, the specific metals.
All right, we got to run. Hey, Kathy, have a good night. Kathy Boyle, she is president and founder of Chapin Hill Advisors. She's with us on the phone from Pound Ridge, New York. We're just about 3.5 minutes left from the closing bell.
3.5 minutes, and we're going to be joined by Dave Wilson in just a few minutes as well for the stock of the day.
We will. We'll catch you down to that closing bell right here on Bloomberg.
updates, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Folks from CF Industries ringing that closing bell as we await the latest numbers out of Adobe and GameStop. What a day on Wall Street. Equities declining, companies that would benefit from an end to lockdowns faring the worst amid concern that rising virus cases and new restrictions in Germany signal the global reopening will be delayed. We ended the day very close to session lows, right to the numbers, with the S&P down 30, a drop of 0.8%. The Dow down 308 points, lower by 0.9%. NASDAQ down 149, a drop of 1.1%. The NASDAQ 100 index down 0.5%, 10-year yield 1.61%. S&P declining. The small cap Russell 2000 lower today by 3.6% as beneficiaries of the reopening trade, including Carnival and TripAdvisor, tumbled. Today we saw Carnival Corp, leading cruise lines, lower, down 7.8%. TripAdvisor was down today by 8%. Well, as for the overall mood of the market, Kathy Boyle is the president of Chapin Hill Advisors. She was our guest moments ago right here on Bloomberg Business Week.
I think people are underestimating the interest rate effect. You know, we certainly see it today with small caps, right, down almost 4%. And look at the tech stocks, you know, the combination there, and there's a lot of concentration. I think people don't often look at things like the overweight in their various positions. So they have money managers, mutual funds, and ETFs, and very often they think they're diversified, but they have many of the same things.
The airline stocks moved lower. Recently a high-flying group, but today we saw a lot of turbulence with UAL down 6.8%, American Airlines Group down 6.5%, Delta tumbled 4.9%, Southwest down 3.1%, JetBlue up 0.3%, S&P down 0.8%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Wild thing, think you move me. I got a few moves I know you'll like. Shaking all over.
Bloomberg Business Week. Movers and shakers.
Shaken, not stirring.
On Bloomberg Radio.
All right, everybody, you are listening to Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Master along with Tim Stenovic in our Interactive Brokers studio. And just taking a look, we're going to await those earnings from GameStop. They will be coming after the closing bell. So as soon as they begin crossing, we will bring them to you. In the meantime, let's talk about the market trade because, as I said earlier, just finishing off our lows of the session, Charlie breaking down those closing numbers. What did it mean for the S&P 500? Specifically, we're talking about more of a risk-off trade today. 119 names in the S&P 500 gaining ground today, 386 lower, Tim.
Excuse me, I got to turn my microphone on. That's certainly what we're seeing as I take a deeper dive into the S&P 500 and look at the Bloomberg industry groups. Only 3 in the green today. Utilities higher by more than 1.5%. Consumer staples by 0.4%. Real estate higher by just over 0.3%. On the laggard side, though, is everyone else. Materials down more than 2%. Industrials 1.8%. And financials down 1.4%.
All right, good to know in terms of the trading day. Let's bring in Bloomberg Markets Senior Editor Mike Regan for his take on today's trading day. Mike, what stands out for you today? It just feels like, I don't know, it was a little like the energy was out of the market.
Yeah, Carol, to me, I feel like the market's almost craving a sort of Goldilocks economy outcome for the economy here. Yeah. You know, on one hand, people are worried about the economy getting too hot, inflation getting too hot, and interest rates rising accordingly, and that's sort of putting a headwind onto the market. On the other hand, you know, we wake up today and you see that Germany is planning to go back into lockdown over the Easter holiday. France and Italy also really stopping their reopenings cold in their tracks. So today it looks more like a worry that we're not out of the woods yet with the virus, that forget about the economy running too hot. We're still looking at major economies around the world going back into lockdown. And it's probably said at the top, you look at the main movers in the stock market, and it really tells that story. Carnival Corp down almost 8%, the cruise line operator. All the airlines really struggling. American Airlines down about 7%. And a lot of cross-asset signals, I think, are sort of jerking the equity market in different directions. Oil is one I've been watching very closely. And boy, another big plunge in oil today. I think that's taken as a direct read on the sort of near-term outlook for the economic reopening around the world. Taking a backseat today as the main sort of source of concern. And I think people sort of flip-flopping back now into that idea that, well, maybe it's not at too high.
Right. Hey, Mike, hang on for a second, because we do have a headline crossing the Bloomberg terminal. Robinhood said to have filed confidentially for IPO here in the United States specifically. So the trading platform, which we were all over at the beginning of the year when it came to meme stocks and just watching some of the trading volatility that we saw in a name like GameStop, which are waiting for it to report its earnings after the closing bell today. So it all kind of ties together.
Yeah, I was going to say, of course, we're talking about Robinhood, filing confidentially for an IPO
we're going to do
on
it today?
the day when GameStop has reported earnings. Come on, Mike, you were mentioning oil. What's the story that the bond market is telling us today?
Well, I think it's interesting to the yields came down a little bit today, so it's not the main focus. I think in the back of people still are worried about this sort of grind higher yields. It's not as fast as it was, but I don't think today is enough to really let people breathe a complete sigh of relief. Higher rates are not a thing we have to worry about. I would also point out that dollar is, I think, in the mix as well. A really strong dollar today. That obviously can be a headwind to risk assets, at least in the U.S. Stock market, to oil as well. And, as far as foreign exchange goes in this situation, it can really be kind of a tell as far as, what exactly people are worried about. Are they worried about the rest of the world versus the U.S.? And that may be the case today. A little bit of concern about the international picture and how that will affect the big multinational companies in the U.S.
Mike, we're going to get you a satellite dish to put on your home.
Am I breaking up?
Just a little
Or an
bit.
old-fashioned landline. I recently got one. It's harder than you think.
I'm sending you a car now to bring you here.
All right. I just got one vaccine, so I'll be back in sure.
Oh, yay.
Good. Congratulations. That's great to hear.
All right. Mike Regan, always good to talk with you. Bloomberg Market Senior Editor Mike Regan. Good to hear what he had to say in terms of, some of the parts of the market that he's watching specifically. I think it's an interesting day, Robinhood filing for an IPO. That IPO market has been a busy one, was through the pandemic and continues to be so.
The Robinhood one is one that a lot of people have been watching and waiting for. Of course, the company not only is going to have to deal with increased regulator scrutiny, but also sell itself to investors.
Yeah, exactly. So again, filing for an IPO, the SEC coming out with that, moving forward with its listing plans. So anyway, something we'll be following. You are listening to Bloomberg Business Week, and this is Bloomberg.
All right, Dave, you're up.
Hi, my name is Dave.
Wilson, where are you? Wilson!
Just what do you think you're doing, Dave?
We're going for a price on Wilson.
Open up the doors, Dave! Who? Dave!
Hey, Mr. Wilson!
Hey, Mr. Wilson, give us your stock of the day.
Evolus, Tim. It's a performance beauty business. At least that's what they call themselves. The company makes a wrinkle treatment called Jeuveau that's a rival to the more familiar Botox. Evolus was founded in 2012 and went public in 2018. The ticker is EOLS. Now, the company's shares more than tripled in their first 4 months of trading, but the gain was short-lived. Last October, they fell as low as $2.85. That was down 76% from the price of its initial public offering. Evolus was hurt by U.S. legal issues with AbbVie's Allergan unit, the maker of Botox. The company also became a legal target in South Korea, where it has a partnership with a company called Daewoo Pharmaceutical. Evolus disclosed today that it's getting $25.5 million from Daewoo for legal costs. The South Korean company also agreed to convert $40 million of bonds into shares when they come due in July, and also to modify terms of a supply contract. Put that all together, and Evolus shares rose to their highest price since November 2019. They closed with a gain of 12%.
Yeah, they're now up 378, almost 379% this year. I mean, listen, if this takes off, they're going to tap into that, cosmetology market.
Just in time for the reopening.
That's what they target.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Dave, thank you so much. You're out of here.
I'm out of here, but I'll see you tomorrow.
All right, sounds good. Have a good evening.
Thanks, you too.
All right, back to World and National News and Nancy Lyons in D.C. Hey, Nance.
Hey, Carol. President Biden says now is the time to pass gun control measures, including background checks and a ban on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. He spoke a day after a shooting at a Colorado supermarket killed 10 people.
While the flag was still flying half-staff for the tragedy, another American city has been scarred by gun violence and the resulting trauma. And the state, I even hate to say it because we're saying it so often, my heart goes out. Our hearts go out for the survivors.
Biden says an assault weapons ban was law for the longest time, and it brought down mass killings. And he says we need to do it again. Republican Senator Mitch McConnell says it is hard to determine who to